We're trying to start on time, but actually Patrick and I just got away chatting before we even went live because we're so raring to go and so chock full of astrology to talk about today. Chock full is my favorite phrase this week. I was telling Chris that the British
Don't leave the H out.
the British royal dynasty is chock full of eclipse charts and events. All right, well, how you doing, Patrick?
Good. I really enjoyed your episode with Chris on eclipses. I've been kind of hot on eclipses myself after watching it, and so that's probably what we'll be talking a little bit about today. But yeah. So I've been doing well. I finally finished my website, so I'm glad that that's kind of done. I'm still have a few more things to kind of get done, but it's been a long time coming, and so now it is sort of updated.
Patrick Watson, astrology.com. Check it out, folks. Patrick's not just a hotshot astrologer and app developer, but designs his own website. Unlike lame old me, I got my stepson to do mine.
I wish this last time I'm doing it myself. This was a huge amount of time.
Yeah, no, it bends my mind. Astrology is easy. Website design is from hell. And my respect goes to anyone who's good at doing it. All right, people are also sort of in an eclipse zone here. I'm seeing a lot of new names turn up. Maybe the eclipse episode brought in some well, welcome any new viewers. We're used to our little enclave, our cave enclave here. We keep a small elite audience, by design or by choice.
So how are you doing, Nick?
Yeah, I'm pretty good. It's been a busy week. Chris and I spent basically a week or so researching that episode. And like when you work on an episode with Chris, it's morning, noon, and night, and a lot of back and forth. Definitely Chris and I was telling you before the stream, Chris and I all week long have been telling each other, wow, I really learned a lot this week. That's the gift to all this. I mean, I feel really privileged and proud to be a working astrologer. And yet, on top of all that, when the work actually gives you even more back than you're putting in, which is how I feel about this past week. Like I worked really, really hard. Chris worked hard, but we both felt like actually we got even more out of this than we were putting into it. Like we feel like we're on another level in terms of what we're doing and what we understand. And but you're already there, man. You're raring to go with eclipses.
Well, what's so interesting is I feel like, strangely, while we kind of know eclipses are important, I feel like there's still somehow it's still somehow slept on, I guess is the phrase. They're still somehow almost underplayed. And I think when you really start doing eclipse research and you really start seeing just how deep and profound this whole thing goes, I feel like it's in many ways an unexplored or untapped territory. There's so much there when you start tapping into eclipses. I really feel like it's you're really opening the front door to this whole phenomenon when you start exploring eclipses, and even lunations just on their own can be very, very significant. So just watching your episode really reawakened that appreciation for eclipses. And I was especially fascinated by the possibility of using eclipses for like market prediction. Obviously that's of huge interest to people, to be able to predict the movements of markets, and it seems like there is definitely a way to understand these things, and there's already been some research that's been done into these matters, but I think that there's I feel like it's probably the primary component in a way that it's not currently appreciated as. I feel like
I
The
mean,
moon
it
and sun are
stands to
sort of,
reason. It's the sun and moon, for crying out
yeah,
loud. I mean,
right.
it's,
Yeah, like
like
they are
it's
the
mom
lights in the
and
sky.
dad. It's mom and dad. It's like the big thing,
They're not equal to the planets. Like they're kind of
No,
they really are more in charge, I think.
yeah. Venus and Mars don't have their own sect. They can be sect mates, but
Yeah.
only the sun and moon have their own sect, their own posse, planet posse. So yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, it's not like I didn't think eclipses were important or
Right.
meaningful. It's not like I had never researched them, but I had never researched them to this level and really come to appreciate how the presence they have in these historical timelines.
Hmm.
Um, I guess the biggest stunner was the example I give at the very end of the episode with Nelson Mandela's life,
Yeah.
which I found pretty late into the research, and that was like we were already just finding all this great stuff, a lot of which we didn't wind up using because, of course, we edited beforehand for time. But yeah, that was really, really something. And then just going back and realizing like how many other really important events, like other things we didn't even mention, the Chinese Revolution in 1949, that happens at an eclipse time. There's just, all kinds of stuff that in Russian history, Chinese history that we didn't even touch on. You can
Wow.
go further and further. Maybe we'll touch on them a bit today. But I know that you have eclipse research that you can share with us that wasn't
Sure.
on the
Yeah. I
episode.
mean, I don't own this, this is just this is something that I kind of noticed sort of casually or informally when working with Chris on, because we used to work on this political astrology blog thing, which you can only
Right.
find now by going on the internet wayback machine, politicalastrologyblog.com. But we kind of noticed with some of the contemporary presidential candidates that they often seem to be experiencing eclipses in the angular places in their charts. So, with the nodes crossing the first seventh axis, where the ascendant and descendant are, or where the MCIC axis is, or the 10th and 4th whole sign houses.
Right.
And so we thought that was kind of interesting because it suggests that in the time frame of these elections, as these people are coming to prominence, that they are figuring into this sort of important story. In fact, in our coverage of like the 2012 election, we noticed this even amongst all of the different primary candidates, that that the so many of the primary candidates had the ascendant in a particular quadruplicity, such that the nodes in that time were transiting either across the first and seventh houses or the 10th and 4th, meaning that the eclipses roughly were occurring in those angular places in that chart. And Chris actually mentioned this in the episode, and he actually asked me a few days ago for more information on this, but I wasn't able to get back to him on time to have it sort of feature more prominently in the episode. But it is true that the past several presidents were all elected at times when the eclipses were occurring in these angular places in the chart. And the further you go back, the more this seems to be confirmed. For all of the presidents that we have fairly good birth times for, we can see this pattern emerge where the eclipses seem to be happening around the ascendant or around their midheaven, around the times that they either are nominated, like they received the official presidential nomination, or around the time of the election, or around the time of the inauguration. But there are some important deviations from the pattern that are actually really evocative and really suggestive of some of the reason for why they would be breaking the pattern. So I don't want to spend a ton of time on every single example here. There are some that we don't actually have very good times for. We don't
Well,
have a
that's
good,
just it. It depends
so
on who you.
yeah, we don't have like birth time. We don't really have a reliable birth time, for example, for Dwight Eisenhower. So
No.
we don't really.
Lyndon Johnson's not really secure.
Yeah.
We do have Roosevelt. Like for modern presidents, we have FDR, we have Kennedy, Nixon, Yeah, even Reagan's a bit sort of dodgy.
Right.
You
Yeah.
know, the Bushes we have, Clinton we have.
Right. So
Of
we
course,
don't.
Obama, we
Yeah.
literally have his birth certificate.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Thankfully. Yeah.
Literally, the one positive service that Donald Trump has given us is like forcing that situation. Yes, birth certificate. That's great. I wish he would challenge everyone's.
Strange bedfellows. Yeah.
Yeah, right.
So if we start with 1900, I feel like that's not a terrible starting point because you'll kind of see
We have
what
a
I
time
mean
for we
right
have a time for
away.
FDR.
So we have
for TR rather.
Yeah, so we have it. So I'm going to share my screen here so
Sure
you can
thing.
see this. All right. So let me grab this over here. I probably should have done like a PowerPoint of this or something ahead of time, but
Oh man, if I had a
we-
PowerPoints take so long. I've been spending all week making PowerPoints with these videos, and the work never ends.
Right. Okay. So you should be able to see my Solify screen.
We do now.
Okay. Excellent. So in the election of 1900, that was when William McKinley was elected.
Mm-hmm.
And so that was in November of 1900. Let's get to November 6, 1900. Here is the chart. Whoops. And basically, what I want you to notice is that the eclipses at this time did not align with McKinley's chart. Right? This is strange because
but this is his re-election. He was first elected in 1896.
Okay, yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
But we also know that the potential significance of the fact that the eclipses would not be occurring in his angular houses for the election of 1900 is that he was assassinated during this term. He was not president for all that long.
No, September of
1901,
not even a year.
Not even a year.
Yeah.
So really, the person for whom this election was much more significant was not McKinley, but the person who would take over for him.
Theodore Roosevelt.
And so when we look at Theodore Roosevelt's chart for the same time period, November 6, 1900, we can see that the eclipses would have been happening in his first and seventh houses through that entire year.
Right.
Because we can see that the nodes were still in Sagittarius and Gemini.
Yeah, and it really is. I mean, because he hadn't been the VP prior to this. McKinley had another vice president. What's interesting is going to the Venus cycles for a bit. McKinley was a red 2 Venus interval. He had a VP, I forget the guy's name, who was also a red 2 interval. But then that VP died shortly before the election. So they brought on Theodore Roosevelt, really thinking that they'd be neutralizing him politically, putting him into this, what is generally an impotent position, the vice presidency. The only job you have is to be there as a spare.
Right.
But but TR is also a red 2. So it's really interesting to me. McKinley's literally the first red 2 president. He has a red 2 vice president. The red 2 vice president dies, and he gets a different guy to be his red 2 vice president. And it's Theodore Roosevelt. And then the president, who's a red 2, dies. And, you still have a red 2 leading the country all through then. Now, so it's interesting to me for that reason.
Right.
But yeah, I get your point. It would be interesting to look at 1896, the year McKinley was elected, and see if he had eclipses close to his angles.
Yeah, I didn't look at. I started with just 1900 just to have an arbitrary starting point.
For sure. Yeah.
I just wanted to briefly note that when you have eclipses occurring in the first and seventh houses, it often takes about 4 years for the nodes to move to the next quadruplicity. So we can see here that 2 days after Theodore Roosevelt was actually formally inaugurated as president on March 4th, 1905, we can see that happened just 2 days before a solar eclipse in Pisces in his 10th house.
Right. You know what else he did this month?
What?
He gave away his niece, Eleanor Roosevelt, in her wedding to Franklin Roosevelt in March of 1905, just after his inauguration. So there's also this whole, collision, if you will, between the Roosevelts. Eleanor Roosevelt is literally the niece of Theodore Roosevelt, more closely related to him than Franklin Roosevelt, who's like a second or third cousin or whatever.
Wow.
But yeah, there's also that in this story as well. So, in other words, the next Roosevelts, the power couple Roosevelts, were married during an eclipse, is the other takeaway from this.
Right. So one other thing I wanted to say about William McKinley is obviously the eclipse that he experienced prior to being assassinated happened in Taurus, which for McKinley would be his 8th house. Now, no one to say, that is always going to happen to you when you have a solar eclipse occur in your 8th house, but it does make sense in terms of the fact that,
And
that's the significance it would end up having for him.
And his murderer was born the same month as a daughter McKinley had. McKinley had a daughter who died very young, and she was born, I think, in May of 1873. And his eventual murderer is born that same month, and was a they were both red one intervals. Presidents used to be killed during red one intervals. McKinley is the first president to be shot but not shot during a Venus retrograde red one, but he was shot by someone who had the natal Venus retrograde red one.
Oh wow!
So that's the changeover in that. And then when FDR is shot in 1933, the guy who's killed instead of him is a red one Venus interval. So it's funny how it'll shift from character to character, but it's always sort of present until you get to JFK. The only red one interval I know in the JFK murder is someone who was shooting Kennedy. It's Zapruder, who was shooting him with a camera. He was a red one. But anyway, whoever might have been on the grassy knoll might have been a red one, but that's
weird. Okay.
If you catch my drift.
Right. So I just wanted to point out then that the next election, in the 1908 election, this is when William Howard Taft was elected. And so there was a lunar eclipse in the summer of 1908. So this is presumably leading up to his nomination, receiving the nomination of president. And that happened, this lunar eclipse happened just 3 degrees off of conjunction to his midheaven.
Okay.
So this is interesting too, because this isn't even the whole sign 10th, right? This is like aligning directly with his midheaven.
His angle. Yeah,
the actual angle. So this is another kind of example of this phenomenon of presidential candidates, like the ones who come into prominence, the ones who potentially even get nominated or elected. They tend to be experiencing this lunar phenomena around the pivotal angles of the birth chart. If we go forward to 1912, that was when Woodrow Wilson won. So in 1912, there was a solar eclipse on Wilson's ascendant. Let's go to that. So his ascendant is around 15 degrees of Libra. And on October 10th, 1912, there was a solar eclipse at looks like around 17 or even 16 degrees of Libra, which would be pretty much exactly.
What was funny, that was the month that Taft's vice president died.
All right.
Just before the election.
Wow.
Yeah, Taft's vice president died.
Yeah, 1912. That election would have been November 5th, 1912. So this was less than 1 month prior.
Which is the kind of thing we're talking about.
Which is definitely the kind of thing we're talking about. If you go forward to 1916, when Wilson is reelected, we know that the eclipses are going to occur in the 10th house, 4 years later. So in October of 1916, rather, in the year of 1916, there would have been eclipses straddling across his 10th and 4th and his MCIC axis. And it looks like in the actual eclipse dates themselves would have involved. So let's see, he was inaugurated on March 4th, 1917. And the date of the eclipse was January 8th, 1917. is just one of the ones that happened across that axis. We can see there was a lunar eclipse, pardon me, around 18 degrees of Cancer, which is like less than 1 degree off of his recorded midheaven.
Right. And what's interesting about this, remember when he was elected in November of 1916, what was the campaign slogan? He
kept us out of the war.
He kept us out of the war. And what happens here in January of 1917 is it's discovered that Germany has sent a telegram to Mexico saying, hey, if you guys invade the US from the south, like we'll back you up. Because remember, this is Germany was doing this. This is the same guy. His name, not Hindenburg, but his partner, the red one dude with the spiky helmet. Anyway, the guy in charge of the German, his name will come to me in a moment. But he's the guy who arranged for Lenin to get back to Moscow, to St. Petersburg, rather, for the Russian Revolution. He's the guy who arranged for arms to be sent to Ireland for the Irish uprising in 1916. And he's also trying to do the same thing with Mexico that he's doing, with Lenin and with the IRA, is he's, trying to like broker allies against a common enemy. Because after all, it's 1916. It hasn't been that long. It hasn't been 100 years since, the American-Mexican War and all that territory taken away, et cetera, et cetera. It's still fairly new. So that happens. But in January of 1917, that's what basically dooms, if you want, for want of a better word, the U.S. into getting involved in the war, is this telegram that's discovered that Germany is trying to stir up things with Mexico. And by the time Wilson is inaugurated in March, he's a month away from asking Congress to declare war, which they do in April of 1917.
Wow.
Right as Lenin is rolling into St. Petersburg. So all these things are connected. If you know the Irish Revolution, the Russian Revolution, and what's happening there with Wilson and that eclipse, you can even see how the eclipse in 1917 is ushering in what it will lead to the declaration of war.
Right. Now, what's so fascinating about the next one is Warren G. Harding gets elected in 1920. We can see this didn't happen on any angle of his, but the solar eclipse that happened on November 10th, 1920 is just 8 degrees away from his natal sun. And the previous lunation 2 weeks earlier was a lunar eclipse in early Taurus. And you can see that he was born
on his Saturn and moon,
at a lunar eclipse.
Right.
A very wide one.
Yep.
But so we have another example of a lunar eclipse president,
and right. And this is a guy who wasn't shot, but he may have been poisoned by his own wife, possibly. That's the lore. Officially, he died of a heart attack.
Wasn't he just like this big like newspaper editor guy who was just like plagued by scandal the whole time? All he really knew how to publicize himself, kind of like another guy we know. He was born in the eclipse.
I know he was a senator. I don't know about his background.
Yeah, I thought he was a media guy.
Okay, I don't know about. He's one of the presidents I haven't read a biography of yet. There's like 4 or 5 I haven't read yet. Fillmore, Van Buren, Harding. I know less about them than I know about other presidents. Where I've read multiple biographies.
The main bullet points I know about Warren G. Harding is media guy, plagued by scandal, like Teapot Dome scandal, just seemingly corrupt.
I know about the scandals more. Yeah, I know more about the scandals, which had to do. I mean, he was kind of a clubhouse guy, and it was the people around him. I don't know.
He campaigned on return to normalcy after the progressive era of the early 20s, early teens rather, 10s. So I thought that was interesting that one of the ways in which he almost breaks the pattern in a sense is because he presented himself in that way as being a sort of departure from this more activist kind of era of presidents for the past 20 years. That's one thing to keep in mind. Otherwise, I don't know enough about Warren G. Harding probably to intelligently comment further, but
right. I know some things about the Teapot Dome scandal and about his death / possible murder. And his wife, who was a Red 3, Florence Harding. There's a red 3 thing where they often get accused of murders that, like Lyndon Johnson is a red 3, and everyone thinks he may have killed Kennedy. Courtney Love is a red 3. Everyone thinks she killed Kurt Cobain. And Florence Harding, it's the same thing. She's a red 3, and people think,
and
she
it's
might have
bad when the
killed him.
Cosmos is even accusing you of things you didn't do.
Well, that's just it. Like, it doesn't even like these things may or may not be true. I don't necessarily have an opinion, but if enough people think it's true, it doesn't even matter necessarily if it's
You
true or
get
not. People
stained
forever
by
are talking about that
association.
Yeah, just by the possibility. Yeah.
So here's another one that's pretty
that's
open and shut for Calvin Coolidge. He was.
How good is his birth time? I don't know that his birth time is that good. I've looked at, because Coolidge is from Vermont, where I've gone to Vermont to the records department there to look for births, and they don't go back that far.
Yeah,
I'm not sure we have a good
so this
source
is a C-rated time. So this is to be.
Right. But what does the source say?
Says Astrology magazine quotes his father to a correspondent. McCaffrey at the AFA convention 1956 gave the same data as speculation, no source. Original entry gave Plymouth, New Hampshire as birthplace, corrected January 2011 to Plymouth, Vermont. So this is yeah,
I don't know. I mean, by all means, show me what you have. I know Coolidge is someone. I know we don't have that certain a birth time for him, because I've really looked in for Vermont being close to Montreal.
Well, yeah, so I thought it was strange. He was elected in August of he was elected in 1924, and on August 30th, 1924, there was a solar eclipse at 5 degrees of Virgo or 6 degrees of Virgo.
Right. And his son died while he was campaigning. Yeah. Calvin Coolidge Jr., who was a red 3. Coolidge himself was a blue 3, but his son Calvin Coolidge Jr. was a red 3 and died during the red 3 of 1924, as I recall. I'd have to check my database for that. But yeah, he had a son who died while campaigning. So it's kind of interesting as well. He's got the Pluto transit while he's being elected. True. He's really the president who causes the who sets the foundation for the stock market collapse.
Years later.
Hoover's going to get, blamed for it, but it's really Coolidge's doing. Or it
that's
happens
really
on
interesting. So obviously we can't be exactly certain about the rising sign in this case. Although if he was born early in the morning, then you do get this eclipse that happens very close to where this ascendant is. Or even if his ascendant was earlier in Leo, we know that those eclipses would eventually move into Leo, and he'd get implicated through the eclipses happening in Leo in that same time frame as well. So it's it's another data point. Now we know Herbert Hoover. He gets elected next in 1928.
Right. It's another C-rated data. So
let's hear what for Herbert Hoover. Here, I'll get his data up. So for Herbert Hoover, it's another C rating.
It's a C rating.
It's apparently from a statement from him. He states that he gave his time as near midnight. A bunch of people tried to rectify it. A lot of other people wrote the birth was around midnight. That seems to be a letter written by Hoover's aunt said that early in the morning of August 11th, Jesse Hoover's father came and tapped on the window and said, "Well, we have another general grant at our house." So it's conceivable then that this is slightly more back to this might be more kind of more like an approximate time than like a completely unknown time. But so what's interesting about Herbert Hoover then in 1928, there was let's see, let's go to 1928. So November 6th, 1928 was the date of the election. And we can see here he, at 11:15 p.m., his ascendant is at like very late Taurus or potentially early Gemini if he was born any later. And we can see that the eclipse, the actual nodes, the intersecting point between the sun and moon's paths in late 1928 was extremely close. to 29 Taurus and 29 Scorpio at 0 Gemini and 0 Sagittarius. And the sun, of course, is there every year around that place. So we know that this was just like 1 week away from a solar eclipse would have taken place in his seventh house, and that this would have been paired with a corresponding lunar eclipse would have occurred just within a few degrees of his ascendant if this is an accurate time. So we see the same kind of phenomenon show up of eclipses happening around the angles.
I mean, it's even kind of interesting. I mean, insofar as we have him in a probably vague birth time where he's either Taurus
it almost
or
doesn't
Gemini
matter.
rising. And then the eclipses are sort of straddling it anyway.
So I thought so. Okay. I mean, this is so far holding up pretty well.
So far holding up pretty well, but we're looking at some sloppier birth times. Now we're getting into some good ones, because we have a good one for FDR, we have a good one for Truman, we have a good one for Kennedy, good one for Nixon. So let's see like the really indisputable ones, how they line up.
Wait.
What'd you do?
Solar Fire is having an issue.
Oh, okay. Shall I put it up?
Sure. Let me see if I can get Solar Fire open again.
Okay. How are you winning?
Okay. It looks like it's back up again. Okay.
Oh, is it?
All right.
Okay. So I'll unshow.
Oh, no worries.
I was about to share mine, but
I can do mine. Okay, entire screen 2. Okay, so you should be able to see it now. Alrighty, so Franklin Roosevelt. It's having an issue again. Sorry about that. I guess it's not letting me open Franklin Roosevelt.
Okay, no, that's fine. I've got a really good FDR file. Let's go here. And FDR, Roosevelt family, 284 charts in this file. And he's born in January of 1882, being a blue 4, being America's only blue 4 president.
And also the only one elected 4 times.
4 times. It's funny, the blue interval presidents are always like Coolidge is the only blue 3 president ever. Polk is the only blue 5 president ever. It's a weird thing. And then blue 2s, there's a lot, Reagan, Biden, people like that. But blue 3, only one blue 3 ever, only one blue 4 ever, and only one blue 5 ever. All right, so this is Roosevelt. And
so if you go to November 8th, 1932, which is the date of the 1932 election.
Yeah, I have 1230 on November 9th, which I think is when he found out. But it's close enough. It's close enough.
Well, and so as you can see, the South Node is at 13 Virgo. So this is just within 10 degrees of his ascendant. So this means that the eclipses of that year were taking place across his 1st and 7th house axis.
Gotcha.
The actual is sort of more the most exact eclipse, I guess you could say, for that year would have been there was a solar eclipse on August 31st, 1932 at 8 degrees of Virgo in his 1st house. There was a lunar eclipse September 14th at 21 Pisces. February 24th, 1933, there was another one at 5 Pisces, and a lunar eclipse at 21 Virgo on March 12th, 1933. And he was actually inaugurated.
Which is when he's inaugurated, but it's also when he's shot. He survives an assassination attempt on the 15th, and then inaugurated on March 4th. And in between it, Hitler's sworn in as chancellor January 30th. FDR survives assassination attempt February 15th. The Reichstag catches fire February 27th.
That's on the episode.
About this on the episode with Chris. And then Roosevelt's inaugurated. So you can really see there are books written just about how Roosevelt's career. Roosevelt dies the same year as Hitler, but they both sort of come into power at the same.
This eclipse was kind of bringing in the main players of
bringing in all those players at that point. So this is him surviving the assassination attempt, which, as I said, the mayor of Chicago. This was in Miami, but he's with the mayor of Chicago. Carter something. Anyway, I have the name in a file, but the mayor of Chicago was a red one. So in this case, the guy who dies is the red one.
That's so interesting too, with Mars
but yeah,
retrograde in the first, with Jupiter as well. Like, getting shot,
right.
but surviving.
Yeah, no, exactly. And even though Mars retrograde in Virgo is pretty common every 15 to 17 years, this is the last Mars retrograde in Virgo that FDR would ever see. So it's kind of interesting in that way as well. But look, you can see like the Saturn on his sun and all this stuff that was happening. And yeah, this is where the eclipses were happening.
We know that because they were happening in his midheaven, we know automatically that 4 years later, they would be happening across the culminating axis. So
right. And that's a huge, at the time that he wins re-election in 1936. I think until like LBJ in 64 and Nixon in 72, I believe this is like the biggest sort of vote any president gets, this re-election in 1936. So it's like a really big sweeping victory.
Yeah, November 3rd, 1936 was the date of that election.
Right. Once again, I'm Wednesday early morning. I think this is when he found out. I'm always looking for when like the result was announced, but you could start the chart from when the polls open. I mean, there's a lot of different ways you can slice it. I tend to just go for that moment.
Sure. I mean, I think probably the closest eclipse, since he was already president, he was I don't know exactly when he would have received the official nomination to run again, but we know that on June 19th, 1936, there was a solar eclipse at 27 Gemini, which you can see there is really pretty close to his midheaven.
I know. Yeah, I mean, I've read a few books about Democratic conventions. Like I read one about 1924, just one about the Democratic Convention of 1924 when Coolidge was nominated. And they do typically happen around July, just like they do now. That's why they always happen during either a red 3 or a blue 3. Prior to the election. So yeah, in 1936, it was a blue 3 and it would have been in July. I don't know the specifics of that, but I think he was pretty much a shoo-in. I'm not sure. I think that he was getting opposition from the guy who was his VP at the time, who became his opponent, which I think is interesting in that regard. And this does immediately come before his whole court packing thing, which is probably the low point of his presidency. He wins this tremendous victory, but he heads into like the sort of the period where he's at his weakest, with the whole court packing thing.
What's wild is, though, if you go to 1940, so if you want to bring up the transits of the 1940 election for Roosevelt, that was November 5th, 1940. You'll notice.
Right. And again, I have November 6th at 10:30 in the morning.
Yeah.
Same deal.
So what's interesting is you'll notice that the eclipses, while they are happening roughly in the range, like almost like kind of coming up to the angles, they're not quite there at the angles just yet. But they will the year
next
following.
Year.
And of course, 1941 was.
It was a quiet year. Nothing happened. Nothing happened in 1941. Everyone was living peacefully, coexisting. The world was a place of peace. Like it's never known.
1941 is the year that Roosevelt goes from being the president who enacted the New Deal to becoming the wartime WW2 heroic president, right? This is kind of that's when he really changes the kind of footnote or the chapters that it would be devoted to him in history books. 1941 is that's when the US gets involved in World War II. Similar to Woodrow Wilson in some ways. There was a strong isolationist sentiment in the US still at that time, and it wasn't really until Pearl Harbor that the American public was ready.
On board. Yeah. I mean that he played a really delicate game of
providing very obvious support to the Allied powers.
Yeah, providing. I'm just lending the neighbors a fire hose because their house is on fire. I mean, that's not. One observation I have just
Mhm.
on top of this, because Roosevelt, obviously for obvious reasons, kind of stands out in the presidency because he did serve 4 terms. But notice that this reelection, which really this is when he's elected to a 3rd term. So this is when he's, transcending this boundary that no president before or since
Right.
has transcended. And he's having his 2nd Saturn return. He's 58 years old. And he's, and the 2nd Saturn return is always a Jupiter return. So you can see natally, he's got Jupiter and Saturn in Taurus with Neptune in between, and Jupiter and Saturn along with Uranus are now in Taurus. So he's got this very interesting Taurus stellium. There's an interesting, triple planet alignment in Taurus. And of course, American elections always happen when the sun is in Scorpio. Let's never underestimate the power of the sun as a transiting planet because, in astrological terms, it is just that. And so when the sun is in Scorpio, it's always opposing these planets, which I think is the closest we'll come astrologically to really addressing, why Roosevelt gets to sort of, have this extraordinary arc as a leader that no president before or since has had. Whether you're support him or you're against him, there's no doubt that he's doing something that no one was able to do before or since. And I think this speaks to something about that. The fact that elections happen in November, which makes this opposition to the Taurus stellium,
Well, yeah, because
a
that's also
thing.
when Jupiter and Saturn would have been close to their brightest points, and closest to the Earth.
Yes.
So
Yeah.
it's pretty
Exactly.
wild,
Yeah.
that would be happening in that particular
Yeah.
time frame. So yeah, great observation.
Shall we go to
So
1944?
what's important? So it's important to note that this was an election that didn't occur with the eclipses being exactly angular to his natal chart, even though the first 2 elections were. But it almost seems to be the case that it was because the eclipses that would occur in his angular houses sort of actually, it was almost burying the lead. The the real story, was 1941, eclipse wise
Sure.
in
I gotcha.
Roosevelt's
I
chart.
gotcha.
So we know he was elected one final time on November 7th, 1944.
Mm-hmm.
And what's interesting about that is
There we are.
he
This time he didn't find out until the Thursday that he won.
so
which
we
is
can
interesting.
see that he had,
Just like in 1933, Jupiter's on his ascendant.
right,
Remember when he was
that makes
elected in
sense.
33,
Yeah.
Jupiter was on his ascendant.
So
Yeah. And when he was paralyzed in 1921, Saturn was on his ascendant in Virgo, incidentally, in 1921. But that's an aside. Definitely a good ascendant. We have an exact birth time for him, and you can just
So
Roosevelt's a
what's
really great
really
study.
weird about this one is the fact that there was a lunar eclipse on his natal sun. Let's see when
Okay.
exactly that happened. He has sun at so
That would have been
August.
it would have been in August of 44. The day I think I know what he's doing. He's having lunch
Yep.
with Harry Truman. And Truman has no idea. This is like the only time, this is like the 1 hour he and Truman spend together after Truman becomes his VP nominee. He could have said, "Oh, by the way, Harry, we have this bomb that we're planning. If you ever wind up taking over for some reason, you should know about it." No, nothing like that. But yeah, here you are. This is pretty okay. No, I guess the eclipse would be a month earlier.
August. So we know that there was a lunar eclipse on his natal sun prior to this. Now, I'm not saying this is only relevant for the election, because if you look at Truman for the same time frame.
Well, this is Truman's nomination, and now we are in the eclipse.
All right. So
okay, this is Truman's nomination.
Remember
at the
all
DNC.
the way back when we were discussing 1900 and how the eclipses in McKinley's chart didn't really seem to be that angular, but they were extremely angular for Theodore Roosevelt, who the 1900 election was actually more important for because he was about to take over. We see the same thing happen.
Spoil. Wait a minute. Are you giving us a spoiler? Are you trying to tell me that FDR is going to die before his term finishes?
What I'm saying is that we see this pattern reflect in the eclipses that the president who ended up dying in office did not have the eclipses happen in angular houses, but the vice president did. And so in retrospect, the election was actually more important for the person who was having the angular eclipses, the vice president, the person who would actually.
Right. So let's put up Harry Truman. But I mean, look at that. He's
Yeah.
nominated during the eclipse. So it's, and you know the story of his
Right.
nomination, right? It kind of reminds me of the guy who's like Patrick McHenry, the guy who's the speaker right now. It kind of looks like Truman. He dresses like
Yeah,
Truman,
the bow
you know,
tie.
the bow tie with the bow tie. But it's kind of the same deal where like you know, all the other candidates are unacceptable, but Harry's just kind of like, you know, he's the porridge that isn't too hot and isn't too cold that Goldilocks can eat.
Yeah,
That's
so
what Harry
bring up
Truman is,
Truman
you know.
for a second, and let's take a look
Yeah.
at that.
Just a moment here. Yeah, Truman is not some guy who like grew up wanting to be president. He's not some guy who's like sitting in the Senate thinking he's got to run for president. This falls on him. He's virtually nothing to do with it.
So check out
You know,
his lunar phase. He was born in the lead up to a full moon in Scorpio, and this is just
right,
after a series of eclipses that happened across Libra and Aries.
right.
I think it's too wide for him to have actually been born at a lunar eclipse similar to Warren G. Harding. But he is born with this kind of, you know, lunar opposition thing going on across Taurus and Scorpio. And so if you look at the eclipses that were happening in 1944, in the lead up to the election that he ends up, you know, become president of, those are all happening across that opposition. Am I correct? 1944. The pre-election eclipses would have occurred in Truman's 10th.
Well,
yeah.
Well, this is, I mean, we're looking at his nomination in June 44, and you can see the eclipse was like the previous day.
yeah.
And it's happening right on his Jupiter. And
so it's happening in his 10th house. And then at the next election, 1948.
48. The really fun one. The really fun one, because no one thinks Harry's going to win. And the Chicago Tribune literally prints. Now I have to go to my Harry file. The Chicago Tribune literally prints a headline saying that his opponent won. And you know, and it catches everyone up. It was kind of not like Trump in the sense that he wasn't anywhere near as popular or unpopular as Trump, but just like no
really
one thought
unexpected.
He was win.
Really, truly
48
defying the odds.
November. Yeah, and this is like, because he wakes up in the morning, he goes to bed sure that he's lost. So this is now Wednesday morning, and he wakes up at 8:30, and this is when he
take a look at that. There
won.
was an eclipse just a couple days earlier in Scorpio on his moon, and opposite his sun.
Well, the nodes are on his
so this is how sometimes these things are happening aligned with the angles, and other times it seems like they're happening around the main luminary or luminaries in this case. And that is I think it's especially interesting too, just given how unanticipated this was. We can see Uranus is right in his 10th, you know, as he has this really unexpected victory right on his Venus, it looks like. You know, if we will
the ruler of his ascendant, the ruler of his sect-light.
So there's a kind of if you know, if we were looking at this purely from the point of view of eclipses, I don't actually know how it worked out for his opponent, but you know, we'd be able to see that, like, okay, well, you know, he's got something kind of going for him. He is sort of hooking into this eclipse somehow.
Well, Dewey was a red 4. I've got Dewey. Dewey had also been FDR's candidate in 44. So Dewey like twice lost. Oh no, I'd have Dewey somewhere. I should have him in my Truman file.
Do we have a good time for Dewey?
No, it's just a day. But wait, he's not turning up here. I know I have him. Okay, sorry, I don't have him, but I thought I did. I know his birthday. I know he's a red 4. I just don't have him in the file. Okay, that's something I'll have to add. But I know he's a red 4.
1952, 1956. We don't have Eisenhower's time, so we'll just move to Kennedy. So this is another instance where the pattern is broken, but in a way that suggests
Yeah, but we kind of
but in a way
expect it
that we
to,
kind of
don't we?
expected to in retrospect, because his presidency was interrupted, obviously, by his death. So if we look at Kennedy's chart in 1960,
Yeah.
we can see that there was a solar eclipse, I believe, that occurred in his 10th house. Is that correct?
Let's see here. Just give me a moment.
No, not his 10th. That was 1963. Pardon me.
1960. Here he is.
His moon, I
Okay,
guess,
well,
was getting hit.
the nodes
The
are close
nodes
to his
would have.
moon. Yeah.
So the eclipses would have happened close to his moon, which is the ruler of his 10th house. If you go to 1963, the year he was killed, that's when he starts getting eclipses happening in his 10th house. So this is kind of an interesting.
Let me just look at his. We'll go ahead to his murder in a minute. This is when he's nominated the candidate. Yeah, you can see that's when the North Node is right on here, and there's all this stuff going on up here on his Saturn midheaven.
Right.
Okay.
And we've talked a bit about this before too, in context of Mercury retrogrades.
Yes.
But
Yeah. So then his
so the
murder,
the thing that in some ways, sadly, is more known about him. Oh, this.
Yeah, I know. It's a hell of a thing to be most famous for.
We can see
yeah.
that the nodes were spanning across his 10th and 4th, and that's when
Right. Reverse nodal thing.
Now, it's interesting to consider, though, how this would show up in the chart of Truman. Now, I mean, not Truman, Lyndon Johnson.
Yeah. Johnson, yeah, unfortunately, Johnson, we don't really have a good birth time. I really wish we did. I think we have this, like, I've got a seed thing here. February 2010th, Pat Tagliatelle obtained a copy of the birth certificate from the archivist at the Lyndon Johnson Library. The birth certificate lists High Texas, Gillespie County as the birthplace and has no time on it. The time listed is from the previous sources described in the following notes. R.H. Oliver quotes a Saturday Evening Post article some years ago that gave sunrise from Johnson's mother. And then the AFA August 63 article says gives daybreak from mom's diary, given by the office. So there is some reason. Okay, but then there's more notes about like conflicting things. Yeah, maybe sunrise. I think what I like to do with this chart is just make it a solar chart and just look at it in a sunrise context, but not
so he also
necessarily.
has the moon in Virgo, like Kennedy. So
Yes.
he was also kind of implicated in a similar way by the eclipses of 1960. And notice he has the
and the Neptune Uranus conjunction where those nodes are, where Kennedy's nodes are, and where the nodes are.
So I was going to say, look at his nodes. His nodes are in Cancer, which means he was probably coming back into similar Saros periods around the time of the at the time that he actually came to become president himself due to the assassination.
Yeah, and he's of course famously just a couple of cars behind Kennedy.
Right.
Like he's there. This is something that happens to him as well to Kennedy, except he, obviously he survives. Yeah, you can see those nodes there with the south node on his Uranus. Interesting that Jupiter was on his Saturn. Interesting that Uranus may have been on his moon. Like that's one thing I contemplate is the Uranus transit made the ingress into Virgo in November of 61. At a time, and Johnson's life changes tremendously because he's miserable being vice president. This is, he's 6 foot a million tall, and he's, this swaggering, bragging,
penis showing.
Total. Well, yeah, I mean, it's worse than that. According to some reports, LBJ is a straight up rapist.
Yeah,
we'll just put that aside. He's a real character. I'll say that.
He idolized FDR. He wanted to be like FDR.
Well, even that is he acted like he did when it was convenient. But if you know about his political career, he was a bit more of a chameleon. He was happy to throw off the New Deal when it wasn't politically expedient anymore. But he was very, very good at at playing the role.
They called it
And
giving
you know,
people the
convincing
Johnson
people.
treatment, was his like getting in like
Yes, yeah,
lawmakers' face and just completely
because
personally
he was very,
overpowering
very
them.
tall. Yeah. Well, that's the amazing story, because when you think about it, you know, the one man he couldn't give the Johnson treatment to is Ho Chi Minh. And, you know, like Vietnamese people are typically physically very small. I'm pretty sure Ho Chi Minh was, you know,
Is
and
tall
Lyndon
for
Johnson is
anyone's
6 foot,
standards.
just 6 foot, like for anyone. And he really plays that up. He stands over men and, like, you know, stares them down into compliance. And Ho Chi Minh famously, you know, like in 1919, Ho Chi Minh is a dishwasher in a hotel in Paris, and he hears the president of the United States, Woodrow Wilson, is in Paris to give independence to all the nations of the world. You know, Wilson had
Right,
his
the League of
14 points where he
Nations.
said nations should be self-determined. I mean, he really meant, of course, you know, just European nations. Let's not get crazy. Asian
Well,
and Africa, you
he
know,
was
let's not get
totally white
ahead of our.
supremacist.
He was a ridiculous white supremacist. Exactly. So it's kind of it's that thing. So Ho Chi Minh literally tries to get an audience with Wilson to ask for independence for Vietnam, and of course he's turned away at the door. And then years later, after the Second World War, when Vietnam is sort of restored to French control, once again Ho Chi Minh is just dying to have an audience with Truman to plead for, you know, self-determination for Vietnam, and Truman won't speak to him. And it's really ironic that you know, when the Vietnamese Declaration of Independence, I don't speak Vietnamese, but it starts something with we hold these truths to be self-evident that all
Sounds
men are
familiar.
created.
Yeah.
Like literally, yes, exactly. That is the Vietnamese Declaration of Independence is the American Declaration of Independence translated into Vietnamese, virtually word for word. So that's the irony, is that once, by the time the war is going on and Johnson's president, and Johnson is always saying, if only I could talk to Ho Chi Minh, if only I could talk to him. And what he means is, if only I could give this guy the LBJ treatment. And, you know, Ho Chi Minh's not having any of it, of course. By this point, it's sort of, you know, war is war. And yeah, I only mention Ho Chi Minh's physical stature because it sort of, it underscores the irony at work
Right.
here. You know, like it's very likely that Ho Chi Minh was less than half as tall
Right.
as LBJ, or maybe half as tall as LBJ. And yet here was someone who was literally the one guy LBJ could not give his famous
Interesting.
treatment to.
Yeah, no. So
All right, sermon over.
let's go to Richard Nixon, because he's kind of an interesting case. We have
Oh,
a time for him.
yeah, he's you know, he's not my favorite person, but he is one of my favorite horoscopes. Love me some astrology, Nixon.
So what's really interesting is if you go back to 1960 for Nixon, because remember, Nixon went up against Kennedy. He was the one who lost very, very narrowly.
And lost very closely. Yeah, it's one of the.
In fact, some people even
elections,
say that,
you know,
the it might have even been
it was
a bit
stolen from him.
So if we look at the election 1960, so if we go to just any date in November 1960, basically.
I'll just pull up the chart from the Kennedy file. I had it open before. There we are.
You'll see that the nodes are right on Nixon's ascendant. And so this is kind of an interesting example of the fact that, like, in this case,
I mean,
you know, the former vice president Nixon, you know, had kind of a winning combination here. Solar eclipse occurring in the first house, going up against this young guy, but he does not win.
I am not a winner.
Yeah, so you know, maybe this has to do with like Saturn getting you closing in on his sun or something like that. But Mars Saturn on his sun.
It is pretty well established that some fudging of votes went on in Chicago and in Texas. And and you know, that was Kennedy's father in league with the mob. Doing that. And that is, and when you think about it, because this changes Nixon, you know, later on, Nixon is like super paranoid and hiring guys to break into psychiatrist's office of people who are leaking, you know, I mean, it spills into Watergate. But you can see like, you know, to give the guy a little bit of credit, like this is what he had some grounds for being paranoid. I don't defend anything that he did in his presidency. I'm quite opposed to him, but I can see, like, on a human scale, like how he would feel cheated on this day, and like how it did sort of impact choices he would make. This Mars, by the way, is about to go
Right.
retrograde opposite his sun. So Saturn's on his sun, but Mars is about to
So
go retrograde
malefics
on it.
on both of his,
Yeah,
yeah,
malefics everywhere. He is having a Jupiter. There are things here that do indicate a victory. It was a very, very close call. But you can see also how, you might have, using this pattern, you might have called this
right.
election wrong.
Yeah,
In terms of the outcome,
I think he's a good example, because I just want to give people a caution who are thinking like automatically, oh, you could just look at the candidates for now and just use this one factor. Like, no, there's multiple factors that come into play. It's probably
Sure.
the case, and because I kind of saw this when I was looking at all the charts of like in 2012, and I was looking at like every primary candidate and everything, was that a lot of them had like the same, like, either sign as their ascendant or had the same quadruplicity being activated. So it would make sense that eclipses would probably figure in closely to both the competitor, both to the victor and the eventual loser. So it's it's not completely outside of the pattern for the loser to not, because if we
No.
think 8 years later, Nixon gets
Which,
okay,
this
yeah.
is where I
So
am now. I've
we
put
can
up,
see
yeah.
that on January 4th, 1973, which would
Oh no, sorry.
oh,
This is
sorry,
still
pardon
the
me.
first
I'm
election,
sorry. Yeah,
1968.
no,
This
no,
is his
you're
first
absolutely right.
term.
I'm skipping ahead.
But he is having a nodal return.
Right. So I was just gonna say, if you look at September 22nd, 1968, that was the solar eclipse prior to the
It sure
1968 election.
was.
That took place at 29 degrees of Virgo. So he had
Right.
one solar eclipse that like just barely breached the sign of his first house, and that's the one that precedes the election.
Yeah. And that eclipse also had Uranus at 29 Virgo conjunct the sun and moon. And I know this because that was my progress chart in 2007, the year my life went
Ah,
to
yeah, yeah.
shit.
So
So I know that
interesting.
MF
Yeah, that makes
eclipse.
sense.
I, I'm gonna let go a tirade of
Sure.
expletives explaining that. What's interesting here as well, you can see that Nixon at this point, he is he's about to turn 56 years old, which is the simultaneous Venus nodal return, the famous age of 56. Remember, I've said Hitler and Lincoln were both 56 when they died. Now, it's not like Nixon is going to die, but there's something about the age of 56 that consolidates the Venus synodic return and the nodal return. And when they're in interesting places, it's really notable to the really rewarding to look at it in that context. When he's we'll get to the next election in a second. I just want to show. Do we not have his number?
So
Here's his
one thing to keep
inauguration,
in mind
January,
that I
of
think
course.
is really interesting when you compare 1960 to 1968 for Nixon is that 1960 obviously was when the North Node was in his first house, and 1968 was when the South Node was moving into his first house. And this is interesting
Yeah,
because usually we might think, well, that's kind of weird because the North Node is supposed to be sort of increasing and the South Node is supposed to be decreasing. But remember, the nodes are really from the perspective of the moon. The North Node for the moon is when the moon goes north of the sun's path, but the South Node is where the sun will always be above the moon. So for a leader, in some ways, having a South Node South Node solar eclipse could be good for a leader because it shows that the moon is going below the sun from that point forward, showing that the leader is sort of elevated in some ways to get above the collective concerns for that half of the sun's
right.
path. So I've kind of wrestled with that, with like differentiating between North Node and South Node solar eclipses, and I've seen kind of in some ways some inversions of what you typically expect. I think there's an expectation that like, the North Node should be somehow better than the South Node, but I really think it depends on whose perspective you're considering it from the leaders, the sun, or from the people, the collective, the moon. And so that's I think it's interesting to see too how those two sort of nodal passages, or those eclipses are occurring across his ascendant descendant, are flipped, with two completely different outcomes to the same type of endeavor. In 1960 he must have figured he might have been a shoo-in, as a former vice president, and just happened to get kind of blindsided by this Kennedy phenomenon. And then in 1968 manages to come to this in a very different way. Now, if we look at 1972,
coming up, and this is a huge election victory. He wins like I think every state but
Massachusetts, maybe.
Yeah,
I forget. Yeah, it's a colossal victory. Electoral College wise.
Right. And the nodes aren't on his angles, but
sun.
They are on
exactly.
his sun.
So in 1970,
and this is also this is a term he's not going to finish.
Yeah, you're right. So you see what I'm kind of getting at here is that,
and it's a Jupiter return of when he lost in 1960.
So kind of making up for some things, but also the fact that he was having the fact that he would have a solar eclipse so close to his sun kind of tells us that, like, if we look at the previous examples of people who had lunar eclipses or solar eclipses on the sun or the moon, those tend to be less good in some ways for the eventuation of the completion of the term. Right. We have these other examples where the lunar or solar eclipse occurring on the sun is kind of not such a great thing. So for Nixon, the 1972 election was obviously a total blowout for him, but in his favor. But but we know that this is ultimately the last election before his downfall as well. So that eclipse was actually on.
We should look at Gerald Ford, because like he winds up finishing this term.
That's true.
Why don't I have Ford?
Where's my...
That's interesting that I don't have Ford in my Nixon file. Bear with me. There he is. Okay. Right. So, and this is interesting because Ford isn't even running as the vice president. He's not gonna. It's not till 73. I think the end of September, beginning of October, when Spiro Agnew has to step down on corruption charges. And this is when Ford is appointed VP, and then of course he becomes president after Nixon steps down. So this is the election, even though he has nothing to do with it.
Yeah.
And it's South Node right on his sun.
And on his,
the North Node is
midheaven. Yeah.
Midheaven,
so it actually gets even better if you go to July 15th, 1973. That is the date of a lunar eclipse at 22 degrees of Capricorn, which is almost exactly on his midheaven, and less than a month later,
which is 2 days after White House taping system is revealed to the Watergate Committee on July 13th.
Yeah, less than a month. Less than a month later, Nixon is resigning.
Right.
So,
no, you're talking about 74. This is 73.
Sorry, yes, 73.
Nixon resigns in August of 74.
Sorry,
this drags on. Watergate was like a 2-year affair. So at this point, in July of 1973, Ford isn't even VP yet. That happens when October 12th, just before the whole Saturday Night Massacre and everything. This is when Ford becomes VP. I can open that. But it's sort of, it's kind of beside the point. I think the election chart was really interesting in and of itself.
Right.
It is interesting to me that Ford is a Taurus rising with Mars in Taurus. And this time that he's nominated VP, Mars is retrograde in Taurus. And even though he's like 60 years old, this is only the second or third time that Mars is retrograde in Taurus in Ford's lifetime. It happened in 1926. It happened in 1958. It went from like Gemini into late Taurus. And then it happens now. So it's not a transit. Even if you live to be 60 years old, there might only be 2 or 3 Mars retrogrades in a sign like Taurus that you experience. But this is the magic of these Mars synodic cycles. Like, sure enough, he's Taurus rising. And this is when, out of the blue, because he's Speaker of the House.
So, so the lunar eclipse. He's
that's it. So
that's what I think that's what I meant. Is so the lunar eclipse prior to him being nominated as vice president was that one that was on his midheaven. And notice that this is happening pretty close to a lunar eclipse, which is roughly square the nodes. You want to pay attention to those. Yeah, you mean a lunation? Pardon me. Yeah, you want to pay attention to those lunations, which are roughly square the nodes, because that's where the moon is either at its maximum southern or maximum northern position relative to the sun.
Right.
And those kind of form those middle chapters in some ways, that from things that begin at the eclipse sort of maybe come fully bloomed or something by the following lunation midway between eclipses. Some people call it moon wobbles. I don't really like that term. Yeah, I just think of them as mid lunations or mid eclipse lunations.
Right. Yeah, you can see Mercury was about to go retrograde in Scorpio later this month when Ford is nominated. And right after he's nominated, Agnew's already resigned, which is disgraceful enough, but it's right after this, just for you history buffs out there, in the same month. The Saturday Night Massacre, when Nixon fires like the attorney general and the assistant attorney general for, and all that happens. And then he finally releases the tapes. And then when he literally says, "I am not a crook," even that was during this period in 70, like literally the press conference he gave where he said that. And then he resigns the following August.
Just before, so just a couple months before he officially resigns, that's June 20th, 1974. When there is a solar eclipse at 28 Gemini.
I have this. Right. I have it for June 19th in California. But depending on where you are in the world.
So that would have been right on Nixon's midheaven? Yeah. Yeah, that was on Nixon.
Yeah. And this is literally, like, you can see, on May 9th, the impeachment hearings happen. And on, July 24th, they've got the subpoena for his tapes. Like, this is like, he's already unraveling at this point. It's only a matter of time now. Like, he's circling the drain. But yeah, I'll put up a chart for this eclipse. In this case, I do sometimes have charts of eclipses in the database. Yeah, there you are. The nodes are on his midheaven. The actual eclipse is on Nixon's Pluto, but you can see the nodes are straddling his MCIC axis.
So then we get up to
where are we going, Carter? Or are we still on Nixon, or what are we doing?
So you can see here from this, from all of these different examples, that there is this kind of ongoing pattern with eclipses occurring in angular houses, or even on one's natal sun and moon. So let's take a look at the card. I read about this a lot earlier. I'm looking at a previous article I read on this.
Pluto on his ascendant when he was elected, and you can see the nodes there. The election was pretty close to eclipses that would have been, like, you can even tell because the moon is over here. There would have been a new moon eclipse, possibly either in very early Scorpio or very late Libra, just before the election. Let me see. What is 1976?
1976 was November 2nd.
I have November 6th, October 23rd and November 6th.
Oh, I thought you meant the date of the election.
No, no,
Yeah,
I have the chart
right.
already up for the election.
Sorry, I'm going across a few different screens. Yeah.
No, that's all right. I see. That's the thing. I'm just on one screen. So yeah, this is the solar eclipse before the election. Yeah, and it does happen in his first house. Like you can see, the node is over here by his Saturn, but the actual eclipse happens at 29 Libra in his first house. Pluto crossing his ascendant.
Yeah, so there was a North Node solar eclipse October 23rd, 1976 to 29 Libra, just 3 degrees off from Carter's ascendant.
Right. And then he's elected here, just what is it? Just over a week later, less than 2 weeks later.
Right. And then for Gerald Ford.
Yeah. And then a few days later, there's a few days later, there's a lunar eclipse. And then Ford. Yeah, this is Ford here. So last time when Ford won, when Ford was appointed, Mars had been retrograde in Taurus on his ascendant. And now it's when Sun and Mars are on his descendant. 1976 was a year of a Sun-Mars conjunction in Sagittarius, I believe, if I remember correctly. And it's, this conjunction is heading here. It's not like this year where it's going to be in Scorpio, the first Scorpio conjunction since 1991.
So this is another one that might have been hard to tell using this approach, because both of the candidates had eclipses occurring pretty close to the ascendant or descendant axes. And so this is kind of this could be a good case study maybe to try to isolate, what's really happening in each one for interpreting these different types of eclipses.
In Ford's case, I see the Mars being the culprit,
square Saturn as well.
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. All right. Now Reagan is a bit like, I don't, the Reagan chart is probably okay, but the data we have isn't necessarily solid.
Isn't it like, I forget what it is, just because I haven't even bothered to really work with it. We didn't have.
Okay. His daughter did come out later. His daughter, Patty Davis, Time Magazine, 2002. She states, my father was born at home 4:16 a.m. on February 6, 1911, after a long, difficult labor. This is the same time Edmund Morris gave as a birth certificate in his biography. But that biography is often said to be partly sort of semi-fictional. Yeah, it even says that here. I've got a copy of that book in this bookshelf behind me. There's other quotes. Early morning, close friend of the family for 120.
It's funny. He's the only person who's used an astrologer, and we don't have a solid time. Like, how does that happen?
Well, this is, his daughter, I had forgotten it. I've been studying him so long, but I'd forgotten that his daughter did actually come out and say that. So it is an A-rated chart at the end of the day. One thing I find interesting about Reagan, whether this is the right time or not, if you put him on a bi-wheel with Nixon, it always fascinates me that they have the same Venus. But the thing about Venus in early Pisces, you get that with every second presidential inauguration. Yeah. So in early Pisces like that. So whenever I see someone, in the political field who has a Venus in the first few degrees of Pisces, I'm like, well, that does align nicely with inaugurations, and that can, wind up, astrologically speaking, coming out in the candidate's favor. So it is interesting for both of them, because these are two men, whether you love them or hate them, they did win in their own right very substantial electoral victories. So there is that to them. But let's just, imagining that this time for Reagan is accurate.
So there was a lunar eclipse on January 20th, 1981.
Okay. And then, the same day the hostages were magically released from the Tehran embassy after being for over a year.
So that was at 0 Leo. 0 degrees of Leo was that eclipse on January 20th, 1981. Okay.
Well, let's just I want to just work our way there. This is his nomination in 1980. The South Node is already on his Sun, or close to it. You can see it sort of dangling there.
It would have been
And then
at
he's
18 degrees of Leo, that solar eclipse or rather,
okay.
sorry. Okay, so on July 27th, 1980, there was the lunar eclipse at 4 degrees of Aquarius. August 10th, there was a solar eclipse at 18 Leo. And then on August 26th, 1980, there was a lunar eclipse at 3 degrees of Pisces.
Okay, and that okay, at 3 degrees of Pisces, which is brilliant
Yeah,
because we've got Reagan here. But the other thing we know about that time is this is when Carter and Teddy Kennedy,
right.
who has the sun in the early degrees of Pisces,
That's
that
right.
they're fighting it out. Kennedy's challenging Carter, but Carter wins. And Ted Kennedy has the sun in early Pisces. So that eclipse is interesting insofar as it connects to Reagan's Venus, which is very obvious, but it's also sort of interesting the way Ted Kennedy gets edged out
Right.
in his challenge.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's a great connection. But in terms of this time, though, we can see that the solar eclipses in this particular election seem to be more closely aligning with well, I suppose it would be his uh, third and ninth kind of. Well, actually, well, I mean, sort of the fourth is being activated by the Venus eclipse that occurred in August of 1980, but it's not really aligning with the main angles of his chart. But he did end up sending 2 terms. So this is about the point I got up to before, because I've already gone over the
Okay.
90s and 2000s, but I never really looked at Reagan all that much because his time was sort of so up in the air for such a long time that I didn't really know whether to
Yeah.
drill
Well,
down.
there's a lot of conflict around it. But indeed, I noticed when I was researching for the episode with Chris, I did see there are some presidential inaugurations that occurred during eclipses, and I did see that this was one of the ones that is very close. And it is happening in
Sure.
his sun sign. Aquarius along with Scorpio, these are the two most popular sun signs for
Mhm.
US presidents. By a significant margin, I might add. It's something like 5 each. I have a grid somewhere where I have all the sun signs of all the presidents, and I know that Aquarius and Scorpio, there's like 4 or 5 of each of them. Um, you know, um, as opposed to like there's only been 2 Aries and only 3 Geminis, and the first Gemini
Right.
was Kennedy. We've like Kennedy, Bush 1, and Trump. But think about it. The United States went all the way to 1960 before it ever had a Gemini sun president. Whereas there were Scorpios and Aquariuses all through history, right up
Right.
to
So if you go
Reagan.
to November 8th, 1984, that's 2 days after the 84 election, and that is the day of a lunar eclipse at 16 Taurus, which is on his moon.
Okay, yeah, on his moon. Where is
And
he?
that was
Yeah,
a
there he is.
blowout
Here's
in
the
his
election.
favor as well.
This is a bigger election than 1980 for him. In terms of the victory, this is morning in America. This is where
Yeah.
Trump got his "Make America Great Again" comes out of this whole thing. Yeah, so look at that. That's formidable. The sun is right on his Jupiter. So that's the thing. There's something about, like, I think presidential candidates, all things being equal, need to have the right things in Scorpio. If not the sun, like something else. Maybe not with each and every election, but when it comes down to the ones that matter, the ones that they need to win big. I would not underestimate the transiting sun in Scorpio and the role it plays in this.
So the fact that the lunar eclipse occurring was close to his moon, and that he was born with the moon at the North Node, I guess that's sort of the main way we can see this is important. But otherwise, it's hard to tell if this is really supporting a Sagittarius rising chart. I mean, the previous lunar eclipse on June 13th, 1984 was at 22 Sagittarius, and then the next solar eclipse on November 22nd was at 0 degrees Sagittarius, which would fit the pattern. But this is kind of a weird case, and I haven't really drilled down into his
Okay.
potential rising sign just because I wanted more to go on, and I haven't been particularly
Yeah.
uh, motivated to research a lot about Reagan. I wouldn't have probably been a Reagan supporter in the 80s.
No, I wasn't, but if anything, I I've almost come to the point where I really enjoy studying the
Sure.
charts of people I don't like.
Well,
You know,
sure.
for
I mean, there's
research
still a lot you can
purposes.
learn from that. Like what you learn with the Venus in the early
Yeah,
degrees of Pisces is really interesting, because I would think there'd be a
yeah.
corresponding pattern with Venus and Capricorn then for every other inauguration chart, right? Because Venus ends up being in late Capricorn for every other
Yeah.
year, every other inauguration.
Yeah, that sounds right. I'm drawing a blank.
It's either going to
but
be
if
an
we
early
just,
Pisces or late Capricorn.
Yeah, like these are Reagan's 2 elections. Oh no, sorry, these elections, not inaugurations.
Right?
Yeah, the inaugurations are the ones I'm looking for. Let me just, I remember the 85 one is one of the rare ones that occurs on a
Right.
Monday. Because, well, not that it occurs on a Monday, but it occurs on the 21st instead of the 20th.
Early Pisces.
Mid Pisces. I thought it used to happen in earlier Pisces. No, you're right. It is later Pisces.
Well, I mean,
Did I
it still
screw
happened
that
in the
up?
sign of Pisces, but
Yeah. I seem to remember it. I think it's when you have the March
okay,
inaugurations, one
maybe
of them's
that's
in
it.
That's it. When you have the back when the
Right.
inaugurations were in March, one of them would be in Taurus heading towards a Venus retrograde, and one of them would be in very early Pisces. That's where I got this confused. And then, yeah, when they move it to January, then it sort of flips around. Then the one that's eventually going to wind up in a Venus retrograde in Aries is the one that's at 18 Pisces. And then the other one's in Capricorn. That, you know, you get the morning star and the evening star. There'll always be a morning star and an evening star inauguration, which would be something interesting to study in and of itself. Although I haven't seen any sort of, you know, explicit patterns yet. It's worth exploring because the cycle really corresponds so strongly to the Venus cycle.
Right.
Yeah.
So what's interesting when you consider George H.W. Bush's chart is he's born with Leo rising. Now it's I believe it's a like a B-rated time, I think, or like A-rated.
Yeah, no, the Bushes are good. Let me go here. He's born the same year as Jimmy Carter, on the opposite side of a Mars retrograde as Jimmy Carter. But he's a red 3. George H.W. Bush, there have been 3 red 3 presidents in U.S. history, and they're all VPs. The first was Truman. The second was Lyndon Johnson, and now George H.W. Bush. And George H.W. Bush is the only red 3 vice president who didn't follow a murdered
Now,
president.
he was vice president in 1980, correct? So at that same election where Reagan was elected in 1980, he was elected as vice president. And so that that lunar eclipse then that occurred on Inauguration Day in 1981 happened in Leo, which is H.W. Bush's rising sign. And thus we know 4 years later
and in
that same lunar eclipse in Taurus would have occurred in his 10th. So, sorry, I feel like I was interrupting you.
Oh yeah, no, not at all. I just wanted to say that, like, let's face it, you know, George H.W. Bush was elected president for one reason. He was Reagan's vice president. So it's almost like from this day forward, you know, he's in. You know what I mean? Even though it's going to be another 8 years before he's elected and inaugurated in his own right, he's really just elected as a sort of, you know, a Van Buren to Reagan's Jackson. You know what I mean? Like you know, to sort of, you know, make sure that the shop's in right hands. But let's go to his election here. Oh, I don't have his exact election. Do you have the date of his election?
1988. Yeah,
in 1988.
I have it. It is November 8th, 1988. There's a Mars retrograde in Aries.
It sure is. There sure is, and it's not like he campaigned running on fears of prisoners being released too early in a revolving door. You're too young to remember the ads, the Willie Loman ads. Or was it Willie Loman? Or
I did.
Willie.
He like really amped up fears about crime, basically, in that campaign. Is how I understood it.
Yeah. There was a TV ad where you had, you know, prisoners, and you didn't really see a white face amongst them, going through like this revolving door. The idea being like they go into prison and they walk right out, and, you know, they're turned loose on society.
Here's the really weird part about H.W. Bush's election that mirrors in many ways FDR in 1940, because the eclipses in 1988 occurred mostly in Virgo and Pisces. Now, if you're using like quadrant houses, I guess you could say, you know, it was moving up to the degree of the late rising degree ascendant Leo, kind of like it did for Trump in 2016.
Yeah,
Um,
sure, but quadrant houses are for
but no,
losers,
but I'm just saying,
Patrick.
but degree wise, it's still
I'm just
close.
joking.
But
Yeah,
but
yeah, yeah,
but
yeah.
it actually,
I
but
think
it bears
I
a
know where you're
greater
going with this.
similarity to 1940 with FDR, because in the same way that in
Right.
1940 the eclipses weren't exactly on FDR's ascendant, but then in 1941 they were, when he got involved and became like this
Yeah.
great sort of wartime hero president. Same thing happens
Right.
in 1988 to
Yeah.
1990. Of course, I'm talking about the Gulf War.
Yeah, and both of them, like this is something I did find.
No,
In,
no, no.
I'm sorry I interrupted you again, but this is something else I found when I was researching the episode with Chris. That both the invasion of Kuwait in 1990 happened very close to an eclipse. This is the invasion, and then the war. You know, when it began on January 17th, you're also very, you know, the eclipses just happened hours before conjunct Saturn. So both these wars were, you know, not both these wars, but the initial invasion and the American response
Right.
coincided
Yeah.
with eclipses.
August 6th, 1990, or rather, yes. Yeah. So the eclipse. Yeah.
Yeah, the invasion was
Yeah. Right.
August
Right.
2nd,
Right.
and you can see, yeah, there would have been a solar eclipse just over a week earlier, and a lunar
So
eclipse
in
a couple of days later.
1990,
Like you're
like,
saying.
so basically what I'm looking at is like on February 9th, 1990, there was a lunar eclipse at 20 degrees of Leo. So that would have been in striking distance of H.W. Bush's ascendant.
Right. And you know what happens to him in February of 1990? I'm pretty sure, I don't have the chart for it, but I'm pretty sure that's the month he
I was going to
barfs
say,
on a
is that the
Japanese
vomiting?
diplomat.
Oh my God.
Yeah, it's right around there. It's like January, February that he does that. The other thing that happens on that eclipse in February of 1990, I talked about it on the podcast. That's the day Nelson Mandela is released from prison. It's a huge, that eclipse is huge. Muhammad Ali's father dies. I'm doing a whole thing on that as well. But yeah, that eclipse in February 1990 is his barfing on a Japanese diplomat.
Wow. So then
I'm thrilled I got to say the word barf on an astrology live stream.
Yeah, so what's interesting is, you know, in 1992, obviously, H.W. Bush loses somewhat unexpectedly, given how high his popularity ratings have been after the Gulf War. But
Right.
he, you know, we also know that in 1992,
But he doesn't play saxophone,
yeah, he wasn't playing a
baby.
saxophone. So 1992, pardon me, is when the eclipses are happening across Cancer and Capricorn, which is the 12th and 6th houses, the so-called bad houses of H.W. Bush's chart. And whereas the person who did get elected had Cancer in the 10th house. So June 30th, 1992, that was when there was a solar eclipse at 8 degrees of Cancer. Well, you know, that's 3 degrees off of Bill Clinton's midheaven. So, you know, clear.
He played saxophone on June 3rd, 92, leading up to those eclipses. This is his appearance on Arsenio Hall. And then yeah, when he's elected, you can see the nodes are here. But you're saying the eclipses had been
also
here
consider he announced his run in October of 1991, and that was preceded by a solar eclipse on July 11th, 1991, which was at 18 Cancer. So there's often a way in which you can see, you know, the event. I tend to find there's a connection often between the eclipse that happens in a sign and the eclipse that happens next year if it happens in that same sign. There's kind of a connecting thread between those two times. So in the summer of 1991, he's, you know, in the middle of like weighing this decision of whether or not to go, you know, officially, you know, ahead with running for president. And then by July of 1992, he's preparing to, you know, be nominated. I'm sure the nomination convention at that time would have been not too long after that eclipse in 1992. So those were both happening in Cancer in the 10th house, sort of a clear, you know, parallel, clear,
Yeah.
so for that one in this case, it would have been much easier to tell that for for HW, the eclipse was happening in his 12th house of enemies and rivals, and for Bill Clinton, it was happening in his 10th house of career and reputation. As
Right.
he's really ascending.
Although the south node is on
True.
HW's sun, and we've seen people win with the
That's
south
true.
node on their
Yeah,
sun.
that is true. So the
Yeah.
eclipses then that were happening in 1992, there would have been a lunar eclipse on December 21st, 1991, 29 Gemini, a lunar eclipse at 24 Sag, which obviously the sun would have been close to his. So he had basically a lunar eclipse almost at his solar return then.
Right. And if he had run in November of 91 instead of November of 92, he might have won.
I guess that's another way to look at it.
Yeah, like I mean, it really did
Mhm.
happen very fast. He was popular in 91, and then it
Just
just
somehow
it
lost
all kind of fell
that
away.
kind of promise. And so it is interesting how it mirrors 1940, in terms of the
Yeah,
election itself wasn't actually as big of a deal as what would come later. But then once he was past that period, he no longer had that. He was no longer the it president, the it girl.
Yeah. George H.W. Bush cracks me up. No, just like this is the story.
Right.
Okay, like keep in mind, Ronald Reagan is an actor. As an actor, he plays like a college football hero, right? Get one for the Gipper kind of thing. He plays, a pilot, a hero pilot in World War II. But George H.W. Bush actually
Right.
had been a college athlete, and he actually had been a hero pilot. Like, he was the real deal of this thing that Reagan played as an actor. And I love the fact, well, not love like isn't this wonderful, in the way that I have a perverse sense of humor, and I really have a perverse attraction to irony sometimes. It's very ironic that George H.W. Bush, while competing for Reagan for the for the candidacy in 1980, that they pick the actor over the
Right.
real deal. And it is kind of like when George H.W. Bush was like whatever captain of his Harvard baseball team. He's also already married to Barbara, and George is born that time. So he's like a college baseball hero. And like, you're a dad. Do you think you could be like a college baseball champion and like do law at Harvard and raise
Probably
a
not.
son? Yeah, no,
I could maybe do one of those things
to,
well, but probably not baseball.
I have a lot of qualms. Right. I have a lot of qualms with George H.W. Bush, but unlike, people like Reagan or Nixon, you can like, he started off as a liberal who just kind of, he wanted to win Republican elections. And it was really just his wanting to win the position that pushed him to the right, and wanting to be alongside Reagan that pushed him to the right. It's not who he was. It's how the whole machine changed.
There's this really hilarious video of H.W. Bush like debating Reagan on. It was like during like I think the primary debate, debate of like 1980 or whatever, and they're like debating about immigration, and it's just so hilarious to see how far right the GOP has shifted. Because at that point they're like debating over like how to who's more welcoming. Who's more supportive of refugees and immigrants, and it's like, wow,
there you go again. Right. I mean, look, that's one of the few things Reagan did that I would give him credit for.
Yeah,
the amnesty. Yeah, my uncle benefited.
So, 1992, Bill Clinton has solar eclipses occurring in his 10th house. He gets elected. Now he gets to 1996. We know. Okay.
One thing before we go to 96. I love how Jupiter is on Bill's ascendant when he wins, because this ascendant of Bill's is just, it's the gift that keeps on giving. But
I was going to say that's one of the reasons why I was wondering what was going to happen in November 2016, because Jupiter was returning to that degree. And I was like, if it's good for Bill, then I would presume it'd be good for Hillary in 2016, but that ended up being not the case. But so Jupiter returns aren't always great, guys. They're not. Jupiter returns are not like a slot machine, or I guess maybe they are like a slot machine in that you get something, but you're not sure if it's a reward or.
Right. Well, that's the other thing is The fact that Jupiter's on Bill's ascendant when he wins the presidency is also interesting because there's this truism that Michael Luton taught me back in 2000, and we were trying to predict the Bush 2 Gore election. And he said, when trying to predict the presidential election, look at whichever candidate has the shittiest transits for the next 4 years, because that's the one who's going to win. The guy whose life is going to be completely,
Right. Well,
chaotic for the next
yeah.
4 years. Because even a successful president, you've got the
Right.
world on your shoulders. Everything they always
Right.
age, right? You always, like, every single one, apart from Trump. Trump didn't age really, but all the other, he's
Well,
sort of
he,
set in
it was really
plastic.
funny
But
though, because when he won, Saturn was exactly on his moon and opposite his sun, and he, at his like victory announcement or what, he definitely
sorry,
Trump.
who are we talking about? Trump or Bill?
He looked pretty shaken. He looked pretty
Right. Okay. Yeah.
scared.
I'm I'm talking about
Right.
after like 4
Right.
or 8 years on the job, the
Sure.
way
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
see them, they usually go
Right.
through
Yeah.
a
Yeah. I know what you
transformation.
mean.
That's all. I'm not trying to, like,
No,
look, Trump's in great
yeah.
health. I'm not trying to say that. I
False
am
word.
not saying that. So this is this is Clinton's
So
reelection in '96. So you've got the Venus and the North
it's
Node
exactly
on his
so
ascendant,
in the
which is
same way
nice.
that when when a candidate gets elected with the nodes in the ascendant, 4 years later they'll have that same arrangement, usually in the 10th. So in this case for Clinton it was different. It started in the 10th when he became president, and this time he was reelected when it came back to his ascendant. And this was kind of
Right.
significant because it was the first time that a Democrat had been reelected since FDR.
Yeah.
Democrats had a hard time getting
Well,
elected and reelected since
yeah.
then.
I'd say there is a caveat there between Kennedy Johnson, which you can argue to some extent was a consistent administration. Johnson kept most of the staff, including Bobby Kennedy as his attorney general, even though they despised each other. He stayed on for like almost another year. But that still there were obviously some obvious differences between the
Sure.
Kennedy and Johnson presidency. Vietnam,
Right.
but like apart, yeah. But anyway, point taken. This was the second thing. Can I just
Yes.
point out one thing about this? Is where we're getting Bill's ascendant, the gift that keeps on giving. I love this. I remember this very well. 1997, Mars goes retrograde. February 5th, 97. Mars goes retrograde at 5 degrees Libra, right on his ascendant, with the North Node now, because he's only just won re-election a couple of months before, right? And remember, Venus was here when he won. So what's he doing in February of 1997?
Staining dresses.
Well, I can tell you that, yes, the date. This is the thing. I call it the blue dress encounter. But it's Mars retrograde on his ascendant with Saturn on his descendant. Yeah, say no more. And then this stuff in Aquarius opposing this stuff. There you go. This was the year. I remember this very well because Mars went retrograde at 5 Libra. Pluto was at 5 Sag. Uranus and Jupiter had been at 5 Aquarius, like at the time of the Mars retrograde. There they are. Well, Jupiter was about to go to 5. And Saturn was at 5 Aries. Like you had everything at 5 degrees.
Right.
Of fire or air signs at this time.
You know ahead of time that he was just going to get whacked by a rash action on his own part because it's Mars retrograde on his ascendant.
The rash action is, is that what that's what the kids are calling it?
Acting rash, like mistake on your own, because of your own account, is Mars retrograde on the ascendant. So what I also think is interesting to point out here is that we can see that the nodes at this point had just moved back into Virgo and Pisces, which means that the eclipses that would occur for the next year and a half were going to happen in Virgo and Pisces mostly, which is interesting when we think about the fact that, like, for example, the news about the Lewinsky affair that came out in early 1998. And there were 2 eclipses in early 1998 that would have occurred across Pisces and Virgo. And of course, this is a huge boon to his enemies who had already been, hot on his case, investigating everything they could about him. And of course, he'd already come under a lot of fire for, other, even before he became elected. There was the Jennifer Flowers thing and, the 60 Minutes interview and, So the fact the eclipses were happening in his 12th house, and this is when his enemies kind of start getting like an upper hand. This is what he almost had. What happened? He almost had. He was having the same kind of eclipse house story as H.W. Bush did when he was getting elected, right? H.W. Bush had eclipses in his 12th house when his rival was getting elected, and Clinton started having eclipses happen in his 12th house when he's dealing with this massive problem of his own making, but with this huge boon to his enemies. And of course,
and let's not forget what he said. I did not have an angular relationship with those nodes.
Yeah. So and then of course during the impeachment saga, that's as the eclipses are moving into Leo and Aquarius, and so this is obviously a massive deal for his son and in Leo, and
right. This is him not being impeached by the Senate. Funny how the Senate always chickens out. Andrew Johnson, Bill Clinton, Donald Trump twice.
And you know what's really hilarious about that? So Donald Trump was impeached and he has Mars rising. Bill Clinton was impeached and has Mars rising. And is there another one?
Nixon didn't get impeached, but he came very close. And Nixon doesn't have Mars rising. He has Mars down at 20, opposite Pluto. That's right. And Andrew Johnson, we don't know what time Andrew Johnson's. But at least, the two most recent impeachments, they are guys who have
now
Mars
Andrew
rising.
Johnson, according to Astro Databank, we have a Rodden rating of C, but he has Mars and Libra rising, if that time is correct.
Okay. Okay.
And the only other person was Millard Fillmore. And
okay, yeah, again, that's one of the only presidents I haven't really studied.
Millard Fillmore also has a Rodden rating of C, but if that time is correct, then he was also born with Mars rising in Sagittarius.
Okay, but Fillmore was not impeached. No.
Maybe he just.
No, Fillmore had been VP to Zachary Taylor, and Zachary Taylor died suddenly, probably from drinking tainted water, which is actually what was killing a lot of people. It was probably what also killed William Henry Harrison.
Okay, well,
and
I'm sorry
James Polk before him
spreading misinformation. He was not impeached.
Yeah, no. I mean, that's what I do know about Fillmore.
I think the reason I associated them together is because I knew they might have Mars rising. Maybe that's what it was.
Okay, yeah. Zachary Taylor would have vetoed the California Compromise, which could have made the Civil War happen 10 years earlier. But Fillmore was in favor of the California Compromise, and that sort of delays the Civil War for 10 years. And some historians speculate, if it had happened 10 years earlier, the Confederacy might have had a much better chance of winning at that point than it did 10 years later. So Fillmore plays this sort of important role in a way, despite being, pro-California Compromise in holding things together long enough so that when they do come apart 10 years later, the
union's now for 2000, I'd like you to bring up both Al Gore and Bush, since we have both of their charts.
Oh boy, now we're coming into the era where I was actually an astrology student in New York, studying with Michael Luton. I was studying with a lot of people, but by this point I was studying with Michael Luton. And this is the first election that, we tried to predict.
At that same point, this was the first election I was even aware of. I had just moved to Arizona. I was getting hair in strange places. So that was my life at that time. I was playing a lot of Pokemon. I was reading a lot of books, and that was
right. Okay.
That was my life at that point. It's only 13 or so.
Yeah, it was still going to be still going to be another decade before you and I could really.
Well, it would only be a few years later, because we met in 2005.
A few years, yeah. By the time you're 17 and I'm 30, whatever I was, 36, 37, then it could. Yeah, that's when we started. Okay, where am I? George W. Bush.
Yeah, I want to briefly respond to someone's comment. Elena B says, "Is this just U.S. presidents and British royals? What about Putin and other leaders?" Well, obviously, I'm only focusing on. We're just talking about this for now. But like Putin, I believe Putin was made president at that August 1999 solar eclipse.
Very like the crazy eclipse.
And if he was
the most.
The craziest one,
nastiest looking eclipse of the 20th century.
No, this applies. I think this applies across like the board. This kind of rule, but
Yeah, we got on the American president tangent. Excuse me.
Just to really
Just,
prove
you
the
know,
point, just to really show every case, like there is like eclipse activity
yeah,
going on with
yeah.
like every single presidential candidate, and in every election, like these eclipses seem to be a relevant factor and data point to consider. But this is a really interesting case. The 2000 election, if you were using this method to predict with eclipses, you'd have a
What
big issue.
what was the date of this election? Now, for some
The
reason, I don't have
date
it
of
in
the
the.
election was November 7th, 2000. And of course, it wasn't actually resolved until December.
No,
um,
no, that was the funniest thing. I I was about to move to the Netherlands, and I planned my trip so it would be just after the election. But then, you know, as it happened, we were still waiting on the outcome of the election by the time I moved there.
oh, we need to make a
Okay, so this
tri-wheel.
is
Yeah, I want to make the.
for
I
the
want to
three of
show the
them
three of them because I want to show just. So they
in
both
one.
have
Okay,
Leo rising almost to the same degree. So
right,
you would not be able to use this
right.
technique in isolation to be able to figure out who would win because they would be having the eclipses relative to the same parts of their natal charts. And so it's interesting that even the cosmos didn't want to give a clear winner. You know, this, you know, it was really going to come down to something else.
It's better if you don't know.
Yeah,
It's better if you don't
it was a
know.
toss up even astrologically. There wasn't a clear, winner here necessarily. Now we can see that um obviously with with the transiting nodes in Cancer and Capricorn, um you know, for Bush that's highlighting his ruler of the ascendant, the sun. Um and for Al Gore, that's highlighting his moon in Capricorn, the ruler of his 12th house of rivals. So this is a really tricky. I don't think I would have been able to, make this call very well.
Yeah.
Now, using this particular technique. Now, obviously, when you use Zodiac releasing from Spirit for these two candidates, it becomes really, really clear. That's one of the clearest ways you could distinguish between these two candidates because Al Gore's peak period was ending while George W. Bush's had just begun. So from that perspective, it's really
Okay.
good. But what were you going to say about the eclipses here?
I was just gonna. Can I tell you what? Can I tell you what 2000 Nick
What?
Astrologer thought? It's funny to me now. So Al Gore has the sun at 10 Aries, trying this triple conjunction in Leo, and then transiting Pluto's at 10 Pluto at 10 Sagittarius. So there's a grand fire trine. Surely Al's gonna win. Surely Al's gonna win.
Yeah.
Yeah. So these are the things that you have to fall on your face before you even know what you're doing.
Right.
Or at least I did. But yeah, so that's what the year 2000 Nick as an astrologer thought.
So it's interesting because the eclipses that were angular to their ascendant occurred in the previous year, which is when Bush would have been dealing with the primary and um, when I suppose Gore was probably just doing his best to distance himself, from Clinton. He really chose to
Yeah.
kind of mark a separation. Some people might look back and say maybe that was a mistake, but it occurs to me, looks like on December 25th, 2000, there was a solar eclipse at 4 degrees of Capricorn, which is almost exactly on Al Gore's moon. And
Yeah.
then on January 9th, 2001, just before the inauguration, there was a lunar eclipse at 19 degrees of Cancer, which is...
All right, which one
Oh,
did you? I
sorry.
was
Yeah,
looking
so
up
there was a solar eclipse on Al Gore's moon.
on
And
December
then
25th, right?
So yeah, solar eclipse on Al Gore's moon, and then a lunar eclipse on George W. Bush's sun, on January 9th, 2001, just a few days before the inauguration.
Right.
So
Right.
we have one of those lunar events is highlighting the sun and the ruler of the first for one candidate, but the other eclipse is highlighting the ruler of the 12th for that candidate. So that's
Right. So this is
maybe one
Gore's
way of looking at it.
bi-wheel. Yeah, this is Gore's bi-wheel, and you can see the solar eclipse here on his moon.
Now, mind you, this
And
happened
then
a few days after. This happened like a few weeks after, actually, it was finally decided that the recount was going to stop.
yeah, my recollection, it was like December that it was decided.
It was at the Mercury-Pluto conjunction. Okay. Another way to look at this is the fact that well, no, that would apply to both candidates though, since it was happening in the same
Yeah, I mean,
houses.
you know what's
mainly
funny is you
planets
can see why this one was the toss-up, can't you?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like there is a story that makes sense, but I think it would have been really hard to use this technique in this particular case.
Yeah, no, I get you. I think you're right about the zodiacal release, and when it comes to this kind of thing, you want to use something else.
But I do think you could make sense of it in terms of the lunar eclipse on George W. Bush's sun, the ruler of his first, versus the solar eclipse on Al Gore's moon, the ruler of his 12th. Like, that is maybe a way you could rationalize, but I can see why this would be, even cosmically, this was a toss-up.
Right. Right. Do we want to keep going?
Yeah, well, I mean,
we can.
We can. I mean, because we're almost, at the. I mean, the idea was just that I know that Chris mentioned in the astrology podcast really briefly that like the the past recent presidents have had these eclipse events occur in their angular houses, and I wanted to just follow up with that, and I guess we have now pretty comprehensively, at least for the 20th century,
right?
Going into the 21st century, that this is indeed the case. Like, for the data that we have, at least, there does seem to be something to this rule. So as you can see here, for 2004, the 2004 election.
Well, I've got the inauguration 2005.
Okay,
I didn't have but look at this inauguration. W is having his second Saturn return, which is also a Jupiter return.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's true.
But the nodes are where we would want to find them in this
exactly
case. Yeah.
Well, remember, because when you have if you get elected under a solar eclipse occurring in your first house, then you always know 4 years later they're going to be occurring close to the fourth of the MC. Yeah. In this case, it's even more remarkable that the degree of the North Node is actually so close as it is to the degree of the MC, which again shows how important the MC is, even aside from the whole sign 10th house. So that kind of explains things for him. Now we know that for Kerry, I asked Kerry in person, John Kerry, when he was born.
This young man.
And he he looked at me very strangely, and his handlers looked at me very worriedly. But he said it was around sunrise, and that tracks with other quotes that we have around his time. So he was born with Sagittarius rising. This time works pretty well, and so we can see that those same eclipses.
Oh yeah.
Most of the time in the lead up to the election, that would have happened across his 12th and 6th, and so he wasn't really in a very good position relative to Bush from this point of view to be able to win, even though he had Jupiter in the even somewhat close to his midheaven. It still wouldn't necessarily be enough to justify. Certainly not like Bush's.
Yeah. It is interesting to me, Mars is on his ascendant and his sun when Bush is inaugurated. But it also, you remember what I was saying about FDR earlier, having a stellium in Taurus? Mm-hmm. It's Kerry's fault for having a stellium in Gemini instead of Taurus.
Right.
Because it's like, it's a little too late. It's his fault. Silly Kerry. No, he's got the stellium in the wrong sign. I think, by the time the sun's in Sagittarius, it's a done deal. Yeah, even in this case, it kills me. The thing about Kerry, this period in 1943, the Sagittarius of 1943, these are usually like, it's with the Mars Uranus retrograde in Aquarius, and these are usually the bad boys.
Gemini.
In Gemini. Jim Morrison and Keith Richards are born like within days of John Kerry. You know what I mean? Like, it's kind of like I think of these 43 Sagittarians as being these rock and roll rebel types.
Okay, but all right, but John Kerry was.
Yeah, Kerry was this guy who threw his medal.
He threw his medals.
Yeah,
on the ground. He
he
totally was.
Exactly. That's the thing, because I think when you think of Kerry the politician, like super uptight, like super, no personality whatsoever. But yeah, he was this, when he was in his 20s, he is like not a Jim Morrison or a Keith Richards, but he is
some element of punk, anti-establishment,
Yeah.
I mean, that's a perfect representation of Mars retrograde, right? The soldier that throws away their medals, that's pretty
and
that's
with
just really
Uranus, Mars retrograde with Uranus and Gemini, the American soldier who's
given the whole history of Gemini, right? There's also a fantastic article written by the late Ellen Black that she showed how you can use Sadak releasing from Spirit on John Kerry's chart, and that even when you look at the more minor repetitions of like sudden loosings of the bonds in his chart, that it connects the swift boating of John Kerry in 2004 back to the period in the 70s where he attracted a lot of negative attention due to his anti-war activism. And it sort of shows how like what goes around kind of comes around in a sense. There was sort of like the revenge that kind of came for him because he has his luminaries kind of enclosed by the malefics there. And that this always was going to kind of doom him on that level. And the other really interesting thing about that article, if you can find it, is that I think it's called something like the tsunami effect or something, is the fact that it gives credence to the idea that you need to advance the lot of spirit by one sign when the lot of fortune and spirit are in the same sign, because you would not be able to get the same correlations if you use a lot of spirit in Gemini. You have to use a lot of spirit in Cancer, the next sign. And it seems like a really random rule that shouldn't work. But after reading that paper, it's absolutely indisputable. Like the technique works perfectly when you advance the spirit by the next sign is just kind of supposed to, and you just would not be able to get the same level of detail and results as she's able to get if you just used Fortune Gemini. So if you're interested in that, you can look that up, but might be available somewhere. But in any case, so 2008.
Shall we go to Barry?
Yeah, so Barack Obama is pretty much a kind of a straightforwardly perfect example of this phenomenon.
Of a lot of things, I might add.
Oh yeah, a lot of things, but for the eclipse thing, I mean, perfect. He was born just a couple of days, I think, before a solar eclipse.
Yeah, that's right. And this was something I researched for the episode. Just to interject, his progressed chart came into an eclipse when he was 6 years old in October of 1967, the exact month that his mother came and took him to Indonesia. She had married an Indonesian, but Barry was still with his grandparents back in Hawaii. But then she goes and gets him in October of 67, and he winds up living in Indonesia. The famous photos of him in Muslim garb, right? Because he's living in a Muslim country, and so he's dressed, somewhat Muslim looking, which would be held against him later. And that was because his stepfather was Indonesian, and he spent time in Indonesia. And that's when his chart reaches that eclipse. That's what that signifies for him by secondary progression.
So something that's really funny about Barack Obama is he experienced a lunar eclipse in Scorpio in his 10th house in the summer of 2004. Which is, of course, when he became
I remember
a household name.
I remember watching that on TV at Project Hindsight.
Oh wow!
Like you remember my little apartment there where I had TV.
Yeah,
I was watching there. It was before I moved there, but I was there staying. I would move there in November, literally the week that Bush would win re-election, but it was decided I would be moving there during this period in June, July. I was there visiting, and it was decided I would come down and move there a few months later. So I remember and watching this speech on TV. Yeah, oh wow, this guy looks good. Someone put him in the running for president.
No, I remember seeing it and thinking like, oh yeah, like this is gonna happen.
Yeah, good luck, Charlie.
this will have to happen. And we can see as well, this is just a couple of days before the moon would make its opposition with the sun, so there's a full
Right.
moon that would be
At the
almost
bendings.
where the eclipse is. Exactly.
At the
It's
bendings,
one of
yeah.
those midway lunations.
Right.
And
then he gets elected.
yeah,
8
so
years
he gets
later.
elected after that in 2004 as senator, and then in early 2008, right at the solar eclipses that occur in Aquarius, that's when he wins the Super Tuesday contest.
Yeah,
And
I
a
have
year later, he gets inaugurated.
right. I have January 3rd, the day he wins this was the day I remember. This is a little bit before the Super Tuesday. But when he won the Iowa caucus, Biden drops out, and Obama. This is the first day I remember that. This is the day where people are suddenly like, "Oh, this guy could actually win, maybe."
Right.
Like the first hint, like that this guy was, at all a real contender, because he wins Iowa, January 3rd, 2008. I remember this because on the same day there was, like on ESPN or something like that, there was a woman sportscaster who made some remark about Tiger Woods and how, if he keeps winning games, they're going to have to take him out back and lynch him. She literally,
Oh my
yeah, I
gosh.
know, right? Sorry, I'm laughing because it's just like, what the hell?
Yeah, I know.
Um,
Yeah.
but I remember that happened the same day, and it was kind of like it was this weird day because that happened, and yet at the same day, Obama won this Iowa caucus, and it suddenly seemed like, oh yeah, there could be a black president. Wow, how about that?
Right.
I think everyone was surprised.
The position at the moon is hilarious to me here as well, because on the very day that he announced he was going to run for president on February 10th, 2007, the moon was in late Scorpio.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
And
I've
which
got
is
that
right on
chart as
his
well.
midheaven. And then you just showed that chart for the
When
Iowa
he
caucus
won the
victory
Iowa
speech.
caucus, yeah,
And the moon is there back at late Scorpio. And
there we
then on the
are.
day that he was inaugurated,
Oh,
the
let me
moon
go
was in
there.
late Scorpio.
Okay, we can make a fun tri-wheel here.
Yeah.
Fun with tri-wheels.
So you want to? So do you have the announcements?
Yeah, I have them. Yeah, I have them all.
Got them.
I'll put up a
quad wheel.
Well, the quad wheel's a little well, I'll do a quad wheel. It's a little clumsy.
Do a quad wheel.
Do a quad. Do a quad.
Really looking at the moon, but the thing I think is so interesting about this is I remember there was a lot of talk about people there was literally, I think Shelley Ackman had a petition to delay the inauguration so that the moon wouldn't be void because it was at the end of Scorpio. But after seeing the fact that he announced his run under a void moon,
right.
And I was like, no, this guy does well with the moon in this position because it's his midheaven. And do you know who has their sun and Venus in late Scorpio? That's close to Obama.
Yeah. Mr. Joe
Mr. Biden. Yeah.
Mr. Joe
Biden. He was implicated in these events as well.
Yes.
Sometimes before he knew that he would be.
Yeah.
So I think this is this always just really stuck out to me because the moon is a fast moving planet, right? It's a fast moving celestial object. So
and yet, no, this is really something.
That's really something. These are really solid examples of lunar transits being.
There's his midheaven. This is his moon when he announces. This is the moon when he wins the Iowa caucus, and this is the moon when he's inaugurated.
Exactly. Yeah. It's hat trick. I mean, there's probably others too that I just didn't even
look. That Mars was at 18 Capricorn.
Oh
when
yeah,
he announced and when he's inaugurated.
Oh dang,
that's kooky.
And
I
Venus,
and there's mutual. I noticed Saturn on his Mars when he's inaugurated. I'm like, oh, that shouldn't be a good transit. But then if Mars is on his Saturn, it kind of it all evens out. I mean,
check out Venus between the inauguration and the announcement. That's same as so it's a Venus and
Mars return. That's bizarre.
Yeah, that's weird.
Let's just put up a bi-wheel. I've never noticed that. Have you noticed that?
No, I've never noticed that. That is crazy.
Look at that. And it's not a 30. It's a 2 year. It's a barely 2 year interval. So it's not like your 32 synodic Venus Mars return.
And you could only have this when Venus is slowing down in early 2009.
Right. Yeah. It's slowing down to
it's this is the only other way you could have a Venus Mars return happen on this time scale.
That's right. Which it was.
Which is so weird.
That's wild.
Okay,
why.
that's
But I
weird.
love astrology.
Yeah.
Ah!
Oh my god, I'm geeking out so much. Oh my god. All right, yeah.
Oh my God.
This is really cool.
Oh, geeking out is so much fun.
Yes, it
I
is.
hope the audience is enjoying this. Maybe
Probably
they've
not.
all abandoned. Yeah, I don't even
I
care.
think they've abandoned
Yeah,
us
we
a
haven't
while
looked at their
ago.
comments. We're just having a grand old time.
Yeah,
All right.
that's pretty cool. So basically Obama has he has eclipse activity in his 10th house the year that he becomes a national phenomenon before he gets elected to the Senate. He has a solar eclipse happen before in his first house when he wins when he gets sort of the decisive victory that he needs to become the nominee in 2008, and then just within days of his inauguration in 2009, in 2012 he has a solar eclipse occur in his 10th house. And then when he leaves the office, that's when the eclipses are again happening across his first and seventh in
Right.
Leo and Aquarius. So he's kind of, kind of a really standard example of this in action. Not to mention Barack Obama, has his natal nodes in Aquarius and Leo. So, makes just
'cause
that
he's
much more
also close
sense
to the
that,
eclipse.
it makes that much more sense that it was not only his natal eclipse situation there, but also the fact that it was happening horizontally at the time he was born.
Right. So
So
this is his re-election in 2012.
yes.
And the North Node is at 26 Scorpio.
Yeah, there you go.
Right.
Yeah.
All right.
So yeah, moon on his sun, and
Yeah.
and
This of course, this makes me think of poor Mitt Romney, like certain he's gonna win, just so sure he's gonna win, and like, oh my
yeah.
God.
So
Oh,
interesting thing about Mitt Romney though is Mitt Romney, he has Gemini rising, early Gemini rising. So when he was winning the GOP primary,
he had the nodes on his
that's
side.
when that's when the eclipses were happening in Gemini, which would have also been around Obama's moon. But
Just
the
remember, corporations are people, friend.
yeah, but
Look, you know what I loved about that? Like, it sounds like a really insane thing to say, and it is, but legally speaking, it's
he's
true.
correct.
Yeah, no, that's the thing. It's like,
Yeah,
you can
it's
laugh
sad
at
that it's
Mitt,
true.
but Mitt is actually, he was just stating a legal truism, which is a totally baffling, insane legal truism.
Right.
But it's like, it was kind of funny that they blamed that on him. Like, what a moron! And it's like,
Right.
actually, no,
And
he's just
gosh, how
telling you.
things change. He was the
Right.
last Republican presidential candidate that
He's got integrity. Like, I didn't like him as a candidate, but he's
sure.
obviously, he's a human being with integrity. I'll give him that.
Although he also, he's a Gemini rising with Mercury retrograde in Pisces in the 10th house. He is adaptable, and he can be slippery, and he can change sides.
Yeah.
He can switch. He's malleable.
He's a
That's
Pisces.
right. I mean, that's kind of his thing.
Yeah.
But we can see here that, because he
Like,
was Gemini rising.
he can, for instance, come up with a healthcare plan and then totally disown it when it's not
I
convenient.
know, right? Yeah. No, he literally came up with the first version of Obamacare in the country, really,
Exactly.
and was the one who implemented it and couldn't take
I
credit
didn't
for it.
really create it. I didn't have much to do with it, really. Yeah.
So the important point here, though, is the fact that the eclipses had moved to Obama's 10th and
Gotcha.
4th again.
Yeah.
But for Romney, they were moving. He had just experienced a lunar eclipse in Taurus in earlier that month in 2012.
Look at Romney's moon Jupiter.
Oh, sorry. No, I'm wrong about that. That was no. Okay, so it was a previous full moon, but it wasn't a lunar eclipse.
Jupiter. Look at
Oh yeah. He's a big boon to Obama's
Obama,
reputation. Yeah, his moon Jupiter right there.
Well, he gave Obama, a good model for a healthcare system.
Yeah, no, really, that's pretty much.
It's a hell of an assist. Team player, you are, Mitt. Yeah.
Yeah. Although I gotta say, Mitt Romney's Zodiacal releasing looks very promising. Chris and I, we released our prediction of 2012 using Zodiacal releasing. We were able to come up with a really good, solid way to use that technique to be able to make the forecast that Romney would lose. And interestingly, if you keep going with that technique, he will be coming up to a new angular period that highlights his midheaven and his Venus in the sign of his fortune. He's entering that major period, and we thought it was kind of strange because it's a lot further on in his life. It's
right.
He's much older now, but
yeah, he has just retired. But Like he's more than 4 years younger than Biden, and he's like
I mean,
not quite a year younger than Trump.
I'm just saying, like when he reaches that Aquarius period, it's not inconceivable that he could live that out. This potential of Venus in the midheaven in the ninth. Maybe this is like a sort of elder statesman type role in some capacity,
I mean,
being of
yeah.
some kind of service that people wouldn't completely hate.
Look, if we had to have a Republican
He's
president,
rehabilitated his image a lot,
yeah,
it
he would.
just
I
by
mean, he would easily
contrast.
be if gun to the head, you have to choose a Republican. I mean,
Sure.
he's the guy. I mean, you wouldn't agree
Right.
with everything he does, but you know
No.
that he stands for something. You know that he's
Probably not gonna
like here.
fly off the handle and
Well, we've been
launch a
talking about how
nuke.
malleable he is, but look,
Right.
he just goes up to George Santos and says, "You don't belong here," that kind of thing. Like,
Right.
and Trump, he's never been, remotely soft on Trump that I can remember. He's not like
Right.
some
No.
of these other, Chris Christie and people like that, Lindsey Graham, who, sometimes they'll be against him, sometimes they're with him.
Yeah.
I don't think Romney's ever been with him for like a moment.
Right. Someone even commented here that Romney felt comfortable saying Black Lives Matter during the George Floyd protests. So
Yeah,
I mean,
exactly. He's not,
that's who he is.
He's the kind of Republican that you would want to have. Like, he's someone that you have different ideas about how to run an economy, but his general, leaning is towards, the betterment of humanity and
Right.
the values that we do want.
So it's really weird. I mean, because when you follow this to its logical conclusion, by age
2028.
80,
Right.
by age 80, he does reach this like major peak period that highlights not only the sign of his fortune, but also his midheaven degree and where his Venus is and where Jupiter is in superior position. So I'm like looking at that and thinking like, all right, he's super old, but why is this showing up so significantly?
It does. It is a thing. It is a thing.
So we'll see about that. Yeah, I've been thinking about that for a while.
Okay. No, that's interesting. Thank you for sharing that.
In any case,
clear there. Yeah. 2028, just in time to run for,
for president again, 2028. Yeah.
I guess it'll be number 48 at that point. Because even if that's the crazy thing, if Trump wins, well, when Trump wins, as far as I'm concerned, he'll be 47, president number 47, as opposed to his first term, which was 45. The way they count the presidencies is, like Grover Cleveland was the 21st and the 23rd.
Right. It was non-consecutive.
And when you have a non-consecutive term. Lots of people have disputed the logic of this, including Harry Truman. Harry Truman couldn't stand. Harry Truman was probably the most historically savvy president, the one who knew history the best. And he just couldn't stand the fact that, he was whatever number president he was, he felt he should be like one number earlier.
Right.
Yeah.
So then this takes us to
2016. Do we have to?
Yeah,
do we have to live through this again?
I know. Yeah. Well, we don't have to spend very long. And I know we're almost at time. we're almost past time.
Yeah.
We should probably wrap up soon.
Okay.
But basically, Trump has really late Leo rising. So the eclipses in 2016 were happening in Virgo and moving up towards the sign of Leo. Now, even if you use whole sign houses, and you would consider the sign of Virgo to be the second house topically, I think we can still appreciate that the early degrees of Virgo would still be, functionally a conjunction to Trump's ascendant. You don't need to embrace the full quadrant view to still appreciate that, by degrees, by longitude, the nodes were moving, were just like 10 degrees away from his ascendant and closer, even at the time of the election. And so I think it's funny because while I was aware of this pattern at the time in 2016, I actually kind of overlooked it because I was using such a whole sign centric view of the houses that I kind of ignored the fact that the eclipses were like inching their way towards his first and seventh. And I think that we shouldn't just consider the houses as totally separate blocks, totally separate containers. We should also consider the fact that the degree of the ascendant is still dynamically active. By degree.
Yeah. Absolutely. And especially like There's another thing about the houses that, I think bears saying, that the angles have a relationship to the succeeding house immediately following and the cadent house preceding it.
Mhm.
There is a sort of, there are four triads
Right.
in the horoscope that center around the pivot house, as a sort of anchor. So yeah, like if Leo's the angle, stuff happening in Virgo is, that, especially if it's heading towards Leo, absolutely counts. And yeah, it's very close. By the time of his inauguration, the North Node is at 5 Virgo.
Right.
So,
Yeah, so it's very, very close. And when he gets to 2020, that's when the eclipses are happening in Gemini and Sagittarius. Obviously, those are coinciding, with his natal lunar eclipse across Gemini and Sagittarius, and even the very day of the Electoral College, which I believe was December 13th of 2020.
okay, yeah,
That was like
yeah, I think I
literally
have
the
it.
day before the solar eclipse on his moon. I mean, it's you know, he's out, and
Gotcha.
that was Biden's first house. Biden is a Sagittarius rising, so
Right,
that's what
right.
tells us.
But I mean, that's the funny thing about an eclipse in Sagittarius is it's the reverse of. I mean, Trump was born during a lunar eclipse
Yeah,
in Sagittarius.
yeah.
Um,
Um, so this is interesting as well because this is sort of similar to Al Gore in that they're both Leo risings, and the moon is the ruler of their 12 houses. And Al Gore was the one who had the solar eclipse like happen on his moon when he lost to his rival
right,
Al Gore.
right,
I mean, his rival George Bush, and Donald Trump has an eclipse on his ruler of the 12th house of rivals as he loses to Joe Biden. And I think it's really interesting that it happened at the Electoral College because I remember how, usually in any other election, it's the night of the election that, is the central. That's like when we kind of more or less know. It might carry on like a day or so past that, but
right.
like there was such a great amount of contention about and really making sure that we really knew who had it, just to make sure that it was absolutely indisputable that the winner was who we thought the winner was, to avoid
Right.
any nuttiness that Trump was floating around, like
And
sticking the
thankfully
military on the
thankfully,
people.
no nuttiness ensued. Thankfully, that was all
Yeah, I mean,
a presumption that and, we were all unfair,
I'm just saying
and
that in that case, the electoral college, there was way more attention focused on the electoral college and its process
gotcha.
than in previous
Yeah.
elections. So it's really interesting the solar eclipse kind of focused on that date as opposed to the earlier November date. So it's really interesting how the solar eclipses are kind of telling us where the center of gravity is in the narrative. Like it's saying, actually, this is the important time. Like this is the thing which is important,
Right.
which is interesting because we kind of seen that in 1940 and in 1988 to 1990. Like the eclipses happened in 1941. That was the
Right.
important time, not the election wasn't actually the most important part of that story in the time. um
Yeah.
so yeah.
So here's I know people are going to want this because people constantly want me to talk about Trump now, and well, they want me to talk about whoever could beat Trump, because obviously I've made myself a little unpopular with my prediction, and I'll just have to live with that for the next 12 months and 2 weeks. And either I'll be vindicated but mortified, or disgraced but relieved.
Wait a second. We've skipped over someone very, very important. And I don't even know why I did this, but we need to look at Hillary because we actually have her time now.
Ah, yes.
Um, so I don't know. I think just out of just like post PTSD, practically, I haven't like really investigated her chart after finding out the time. Interestingly, haven't delved too deep into it because I just
Well, look, let's be honest. We do have an AM PM issue with this still,
no, we don't.
right?
No, I don't
Yeah,
think we
we
do.
do.
It's no, it's absolutely PM. No, we did the whole episode. Remember that?
We did the
Yeah.
whole episode, and at the very end, it came up that the AM PM looked a little.
No, I think
At the
it's
very end of the episode, it came up.
this has got to be it. But
Look, I think this is it because I said this was it when you didn't think this was it. So
So wait, can we look at November 8th, 2016?
Yes, let's do that. I'm just trying to be fair here. I think
So
there is some AM PM issue with her. I think it is.
So in
All
her
right.
case, the eclipses were occurring in her 10th and 4th, but still far away from her midheaven, which is interesting. September 16th, 2016 was a lunar eclipse at 24 Pisces, which was right on her moon in the 10th.
Okay, yep.
And that was the eclipse most immediately prior to the actual time of the election. And of course, a lot of crazy things happened right in the week leading up to the election with James Comey and everything.
Oh, so much, yeah. You know, the Billy Bush tape. I mean, that was really like you know, you would have thought like the Billy Bush tape comes out like just before the second debate, I think, or before the third. And you really would have thought like, okay, that's it. No presidential candidate can survive that. And yeah, Donnie did it somehow.
Wow.
Not the last time we would see him wiggle out of something that just seemed complete, like that for any other candidate would absolutely be an instant, like you're gone.
Yeah, like
you know?
like really like unforgivable offenses.
Oh yeah, I mean,
yeah,
it's just insane.
I mean, he like made
and
fun of like a
physically disabled person,
and
the
just
journalist.
oh my god, like yeah, I
There was just
I
all
really
this
thought
stuff,
that was it. I saw that and I was just like,
yeah.
there's no way, like no one can do this.
I mean,
no one should do
you
that.
You remember what was his name? Howard, the guy who was trying to run, and he went, yay!
Yeah. Howard Dean.
Howard Dean. Howard Dean.
The shriek
you know,
that ended a career.
Right, give me a break. He went, wee!
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, and like that was the standard before. Like, oh, you know, the dude was looking really good, and then he went, wee!
Yeah.
And then Trump comes along, is like, yeah,
here's all these unforgivable things, you know.
Yeah, I mean, his entire life has been wee!
right.
Nothing came of it.
So this is interesting. So we kind of have like so for Trump, the solar eclipse of 2016 that was closest to his ascendant was September 1st. That was a solar eclipse that was like moving up towards his ascendant, whereas Hillary was having a southward moving lunar eclipse on her moon in the 10th, 2 weeks later. So it seems like that's sort of associating her with the moon and its kind of disadvantaged position in moving south of the sun's path, and her aligning directly with it because it's her moon in the 10th. Whereas for Trump, he, I guess, is more associated with that solar eclipse that was happening in Virgo, and the fact that it was like the sun like moving progressively, or the eclipse, you know, the nodes moving progressively closer towards his ascendant, that seemed to be sort of maybe showing that one was kind of moving upward and another was moving towards a lower state.
So the interesting thing about Hillary, I've noticed, is she also had progressed eclipse. She's had 2 progressed eclipses over the course of her life already. And I'm just wondering if that doesn't have something to do with what we're seeing. So there was a solar eclipse on November 12th, which is like 17 days after she was born, which corresponds to 1964, which I think is when she's like a Goldwater Republican.
Right.
And but will shift. And then then there's a progressed lunar eclipse that occurs, let's see, 28 plus 5, when she's 33, which would be in 1980, which is
that's important.
That's when Bill loses.
And that's when she like rebrands herself as Hillary Clinton.
She rebrands herself in early 1982, but as a response to what happened
in 1980.
She rebrands herself. Yeah, it's because of what happens in 1980. In early 1982, during the Venus retrograde in Aquarius and the Mars retrograde in Libra. Remember, Mars retrograde in Libra The next time that'll happen 17 years later
Is
or 15
yeah,
years
blue
later
dresses
is when
and
the,
stains.
right,
Yeah.
blue dresses. But the Mars retrograde in Libra of early 82, that's when she changed her, she brands herself as Hillary Rodham Clinton.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's really, yeah, that's great.
But she does it because she'd been going by Hillary Rodham, and people are like, what's with this woman? Why won't she take her husband's name? So yeah, so she just adds on the Clinton after.
Right.
So those are interesting. Those progressed eclipses are very interesting.
So yeah, I mean, there's probably a lot more to discuss with her, but at at least in terms of like 2016 and comparing the eclipses of Trump and Hillary, I think that's the main way that I would be able to break them down sort of intelligibly to figure out like why one suggested one outcome than the other. But it was hard to be able to do that in the time. So that brings us up to kind of the current situation for 2024, where Joe Biden does not appear to have eclipses occurring in the angles of his chart. Should we take a look at that?
Actually, know what I suggest? I suggest we
Maybe
end
end
today.
today. Yeah.
We end today, and we say, come check in next week, and we'll look at the upcoming stuff, and we'll table this. And this way, we get our
Sure. Yeah. So thank you guys so much for staying
we're
with
forgetting
us.
about Liz Cheney. When did Liz Cheney run?
Liz Cheney.
Hasn't
Well,
run.
she did run for I think Senate.
Yeah, but
No.
I'm going through all the okay, Zinnia Coir is saying, love it. How about RFK Jr.? RFK Jr. is also born during an eclipse, like Trump. We decided not to cover it in the podcast episode. But Trump and RFK Jr., there's going to be, at least 2 eclipse nativities running in that next election.
Well, and Biden is also a Sun in Scorpio opposite Moon in Taurus. He's not an eclipse person, I think, but he was born at a kind of lunar alignment. But I guess we should probably call it a day for today. But I just wanted to, just to follow up, I guess the most epic follow up to Chris's statement in the Astrology podcast about this phenomenon of presidential candidates having eclipse activity occurring in the angular houses around times of elections. You can see it gets a little more complicated than that, but like it basically holds up pretty well. And that this could be a way of, you could maybe use some of these considerations to be able to have an edge in your analysis of who might win. And this time it looks very, very interesting.
We'll get to that. I know people have been asking a couple of weeks in a row to talk about RFK Jr. and I've been looking at him for a while. I study the Kennedys. You saw I had the Kennedy file open earlier when I was looking at JFK. So I'm interested in the family. I mean, that's the thing. I study a few things. When I study a president, I don't just study all the transits of his life and the political career, but I also look at everyone on his staff and the whole family. And with the Kennedys, he comes from one of 9 children. So there's this whole dynasty and, there's so much to work with there as a politician, as part of a family. So Kennedy pushes a lot of the buttons I like for research, and he's got a good, well-timed birth chart. But FDR Jr., RFK Jr. does not. He's one of the few Kennedys we don't have a birth time for. He was born in Washington, D.C. So while the rest are often born in Massachusetts and we have their birth times, we don't have his.
He would be able to get it, though. He should be able to get it. The times are on D.C. birth certificates if you get the long form version. Because I've had clients on there.
Yeah. No, I'm sure they record it, but someone's going to have to stalk RFK Jr.
Someone said happy birthday tomorrow, Patrick. I
meant to say the same thing.
It's my birthday tomorrow. This solar eclipse that has just happened has happened pretty close to my natal sun. We know that this is kind of a bigger one. So
good time to launch a new website or something.
And I'm having the lunar eclipse occur in my 10th house. So this has kind of been a big week for getting a little bit more into my new role as president of Capasar, as well as rebranding and redoing my website and everything. There are still some issues with it I still have to fix, but otherwise it is available. You can check it out.
Fantastic. And yeah, some people have been chiming in on chat. Sorry, we haven't paid much attention to chat. I've just tried to go through and read a bunch, but obviously we were quite involved in the conversation. So sorry if we ignored anything you said. But for those of you who watched the recent podcast episode that I was on, some people have mentioned that I'm now selling a couple of files from my 3 files from my database. One is my actually, do you mind if I show just
please
quickly?
Yeah, no, please.
Okay, just I'll because I think not everyone necessarily, people who watch this live stream have some idea of what my database is, but if we have new listeners today, just to give you an idea. So like, yeah, this is my Donald Trump file, which has 300 charts. It's not up for sale right now, but what is up for sale, everything in that, all the nativities in that, actually everything in that file is in my American history file. So this is one of the 3 files I'm selling. My American history file has every nativity and every event relating to American history in my database. So, this solar eclipse in 1142 is an important eclipse in the Haudenosaunee. It's one of the few Native American astrological events that we can track down. This is a very important eclipse in their history, in their sort of cultural mythology. So I have that there, and then Christopher Columbus, Ponce de Leon, the usual suspects, Henry Hudson, for slaves arrive, pilgrims, and then it goes all the way through American history, George Washington getting married. Here we are in the Revolutionary War, all the different battles of the Revolutionary War, and the diplomacy and the declarations of independence and all that stuff. And then moving along, just like all these nativities, all these events, all the wars, all the big events, anything you could want, right up until the last thing in it for now was when the Tennessee Congress voted to expel 2 members last April. So it's not always super up to date with today's charts, but as a sort of, everything, all the work that we did on the podcast episode, and of course, most of what we've been doing today, I guess at first we were using your database, Patrick.
Oh, I was using yours.
Oh, you were using mine as well.
That's where I got all of the, yeah.
Okay, so there you go. All the research that you've seen on the podcast, all the research you've seen done today could be done with this one American history file. And this is just one of the 3 that I'm selling. I'm also selling, the 3 of them are selling as a
package. I've been using your databases for years, Nick. Yeah.
Sure,
yeah, I mean, it's amazing. It's an amazing resource. Okay. Someone's asking if you can use it without, oh, sorry, go ahead.
Oh yeah, you can use it with Astro Gold, and I believe it even works with other software programs, but I use it with Astro Gold as well as SolarFire. So if that's the concern, yes. There's the Great Britain file, which is the same deal as American history. A lot of events. There's also some sort of music in there as well, the British invasion, but a lot of British history going, all the way back to William the Conqueror and kings being crowned in Westminster Abbey and the Crusades and quite a few wars, quite, some colonialism happening in there, just everything relating to Great Britain. And then finally, the pièce de résistance is my general natal chart file. This is all the nativities, timed and untimed birth charts. Obviously, these first 2, Romulus and Socrates, are just symbolic. But from Alexander the Great to Augustus Caesar, Tiberius, going all the way through history, every nativity, all the musicians, all the actors, all the politicians, whatever athletes I have, they're all in here. So these are 3 files from my database, and I'm selling them really to see if there's much interest in this as a commercial project, product. And if there is, I'm going to sell more of these. For now, it's available for site on the astrologypodcast.com/database. Astrology.com. I'll even type it in the comments. The URL is the Astrology Podcast, right?
I believe so.
Yeah, .com/database. If I'm wrong, go ahead and Google it, but I'm pretty sure that's the link. That's where it can be obtained. It's 3 chart files for $20 US. Chris thought I should charge $19.99, and I'm like, I hate things at the $19.99, so it's $20. These days, it's the price of a burger, or a veggie burger, depending on. Well, it is.
Yeah,
I mean,
no,
it
I
is,
know,
right?
I know.
Go in a sit-down restaurant
I'm
and try to
laughing,
pay
but
less than
I'm
$20.
crying inside.
Right. In other words, $20 used to be a lot of money.
Right.
Today, it's the cost of a burger.
No, that's an incredible price for the years you've spent slaving away. You literally,
It's a special introductory price. Eventually, I'm going to put the whole database up, for something, but I
he
don't know.
put all of this in manually, guys. Like every single
Yes.
entry was personally attended to by Nick. I mean, it's pretty wild. I also love that you put in like the stations and various eclipses in there too, because it kind of, because when you're just scrolling through, I find that you end up being able to make connections that you would never have thought of making before, because they just happen to be placed there temporally, in the same time. So I think it's, it's an incredible achievement, really. And I think that if we can combine AI and its data collecting, and we could like build on what you've done and really expand it into
that's what needs to happen.
Thing.
This can't begin and end with me. This is the approach that that I think astrologers really need to adopt. For those who have, lots of astrologers do what I do. I don't know if they necessarily have databases. I don't want to claim too much originality, but
how many files would you say you've done in total? Like how many files are in? Is it like
in this? It's in the hundreds,
hundreds of thousands.
I don't know. No, files or charts?
Yeah, like charts.
Files. Okay, because charts and files are two different things. The larger, like for every single chart, it's somewhere in the 40,000.
Dang.
Yeah, it's somewhere in the 40,000 range. Files are like, my Donald Trump file has 300 charts. When just the files, there are hundreds of them, several hundred. Charts combining nativities and events, 40,000 something. Maybe it's 50,000 by now, but I think it's 40,000 something.
Wow.
Yeah, I'm testing the water with demand. That's right, Kate. If this is popular, there's a lot. There are many more components to it. But also, look, $20 might seem like a low price, but if a lot of people buy it, then I can feed my family. So there's that. I didn't want to make it too expensive. I know what it's like. I've been like a struggling astrology student. I know what that's like. When I was in my 20s studying in New York, I would sometimes skip meals just so I could pay for an astrology class that I was taking later that day. So I know I've been there. And even now, I'm middle-aged and I'm, my career as an astrologer is more successful than it's ever been, but I'm living in Vancouver. So I'm paying Vancouver rent. I'm still like living hand to mouth, even though like if I was earning today, well, if I was earning that 20 years ago, I would have been living large, but it's almost nothing. But
that's what you obviously got into this whole field for, right? Was the money,
for the money,
and the chicks, right?
The money and the chicks. Anyone who gets into astrology for the money and or the chicks is like, fighting a losing battle.
That's the wrong career path, really.
No, it's. I don't regret the choice.
Oh no, of course not.
But I became a professional astrologer because I'm just an astrologer, because I had to be doing it every day because I was drawn to do it. And if I had to like eat ramen noodles and live on a street corner for the rest of my life to do astrology, like if there's not
enough time to do astrology as a hobby. Like when you want to do it as much as you do it, it has to be your job. It has to be your full-time job. So that's kind of what I sort of found, is that I couldn't keep just doing it. It couldn't just keep being an obsessive, obsession. It couldn't stay that. It had to become what I did.
Yeah. That's right. So if you guys are interested, that's it. I want to make it available enough that, even if you are, really struggling, and I know a lot of you are, It's still affordable. Like I said, at worst, skip a meal like I used to. Or, not that I want people to skip meals, but if it's really comes down to that and you really want it, at least it's something that's still reachable, even if it hurts to, even if every $20 counts, which I totally understand. So yeah, I wanted it to be fair. I wanted it to be available. I know probably so many of our brightest young astrologers are people who, aren't necessarily making a living at it or making much money at all at it. But, I want you to have that chance. And yeah, the database eventually will be developed with AI. That's something that I mentioned on the podcast as well, that you and I are working towards doing. Oh, Kate's bringing up Austin's first date with Kate. Yeah. I know that story, but I'm not going to comment on my friends' relationships. You can, if Austin's related that
comment.
story. Yeah. They're dear friends of ours, and we were sure thrilled when Austin found his lady. We knew him before he knew Kate. Kate came along.
But yeah, no, we ship.
Yeah, that's right. All right. Who are you, Patrick?
I'm Patrick Watson. I'm an astrologer. You can visit my website at patrickwatsonAstrology.com. You can see my brand new updated website where I have all my services there for general natal consultations, forecasts, timing, horary, rectification, elections. I'm kind of an all-around astrologer. I have articles on there. I have my videos. I'm working on new timestamps and descriptions for our past live streams.
Yes, at last.
So that
no one's been asking for that, Patrick.
Yeah,
no one wants
that. So I want to make previous videos more accessible. I'm also going to be probably appearing more on social media in the next few weeks and months. So I hope to be sort of more active in that now that I'm getting over my infrastructure issues. So anyway, so that's who I am, and that's what I'm currently doing, and that's where you can find me on social media at pwatsonastro on most social media sites, or at my website patrickwatsonAstrology.com.
All right. And I'm Nick Dagan Best at nickdaganbestastrologer.com. Remember, he's astrology.com. I'm astrologer.com. I'm available as well for natal readings, electional charts, relocation, electionals. Did I say that already? And, just your general, humble country astrologer living in the big city. And, with the straw between my teeth. And yes, please, if you're interested in purchasing my database, please do it immediately at theastrologypodcast.com space. And then go have fun with it, because astrology is fun. We've had a blast today. This has been really, really, really fun.
Yeah, no, I if I wasn't, I would have wanted to do this even if we weren't being like watched. I would just, like.
Well, you and I, we even started today. You and I started chatting. We got on the call early, and we just started chatting. And then I'm like, oh wait, we got to talk to people.
Yeah, one of my favorite things. One of my favorite things to do would just be to like geek out, about astrology with you, for hours.
Exactly.
Like, that's what I would like to do.
That is why we do the live stream. We appreciate the audience, but this really is what Patrick and I would be doing, even if no one turned up. That's and that's how we have these things. That's why there isn't much of a plan. That's why we're not too slick, too organized, all this. I mean, those are great, those sort of platforms, but we really just wanted to give you the bare, two guys talking, two people talking. It doesn't matter that we're guys, but we are, but just two astrologers who are really into it, getting into the weeds with everything we love to do. The database isn't just runnable on Solar Fire. If you have Astro Gold, you can run it on that. It might even run on other software platforms. I think I believe it is sort of a something that can run on many different ones, but I do run it on Astro Gold myself regularly. You saw me do it earlier in the episode in today's live stream. So yeah, you don't have to go out and get Solar Fire if you only have Astro Gold.
You might have to adjust your import settings depending on the software you're using.
Yeah,
I'm not sure how it's formatted, but
it's not hard. The only difference is Astro Gold doesn't have as many bells and whistles as Solar Fire, so you can't do as many sort of intricate searches with the database, which is one of the great things. Solar Fire is just, there's so much that you can do. But still, with Astro Gold, you can still do zodiacal releasing or other work within the limitations of the software of the database. All right. I guess that's it. I guess we've said everything we can.
yeah.
Thank you, everyone, for tuning in and participating, even though we more or less ignored you for most of the conversation.
Yeah, that's pretty much sorry.
That's it. I guess without further ado, I am probably doing my live stream tomorrow. There's a small chance I won't be, but I most likely am. So do look, tomorrow I'll make an announcement. I'll either say I'm up for the live stream, and do tune in. Otherwise I'll tune in next week. And of course, next Sunday, Watson and I will be here with bells on.
Yeah, no, that's the plan.
Yeah, definitely with bells on.
With bells.
I don't know why we need to be wearing bells on, but I've gone and said it. We're going to have to go and do it.
All right. Okay.
Oh, look, I got bells. I put these on my backpack to scare away bears when I'm hiking in the mountains. All right. Okay. There you go. With bells on. Have a great day. Thank you, Watson. Bye, everyone.